Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully you are all feeling great about yourself and you finally have managed to reach and survive till another weekend. My name is Alexander, also known as Senrievitz, and together with my brother Yuri, also known as Terrorlord, we shall be having podcast discussion number 2, talking about the combat system of this game. We're going to be analyzing such topics as the melee system, various different skills, omnio magic, ninjutsu, buffs, passives, boss skills, and so on and so forth. Now keep in mind, just like with the story, this is not necessarily an in-depth analysis and breakthrough of all the possible mechanics. It's more so things that we liked about this particular system and things that we didn't like about it, with some objective flaws and or positive elements. Because unlike the story, which were mostly everything about the story consisted of the negative stuff, here at least we have some positives that we can share with all of you, that we could recommend you to use and to test it for yourselves. Also keep in mind, again, for the sake of better understanding our viewpoints, both of us have completed Nioh 2 from the very first difficulty all the way up until Dream of the Nioh, including its endgame modes like Depths of the Underworld and Underworld themselves. So it's not just, oh, they played through first difficulty and they are ready to talk about some of the aspects. Additionally, we are also going to be talking from the point of view and analyzing those systems in general, as well as when we switch over the topic towards weapons, those weapons that we were using. We're not going to be pretending that we know everything, every possible outcome, every possible moveset of any other weapons. We are expressing our thoughts about the weapons that we have used extensively ourselves. So that's for the better understanding of the context.
Yeah, believe it or not, after completely trashing the story of this game, when it comes to the combat aspects of the game, we are actually going to be having both positives and negatives thing to say. Because, yes, the combat, in my opinion, even though, I don't consider it flawless, the combat of this game is actually way better than Nioh 1. And believe it or not, after you play this game and you will going to get into the combat of the second game, you will going to find it very hard to go back into Nioh 1. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to do with the fact that old weapons received some kind of new take. From myself, I'm going to say I played Nioh 1 and Nioh 2 by using a ninjutsu kusarigama with light armor sort of build. And yes, I am going to immediately kind of state one of the negative things related to today's topic, which is the fact that Kusarigama actually received 0 changes from Nioh 1. That includes the fact that if something was buggy or not right since the Nioh 1, the same thing goes to Nioh 2. This doesn't mean that all of the other weapons received that thing, but I will be mostly analyzing from the point of view of what weapon did I use throughout this whole playthrough that I did, and my brother is going to be focusing on his weapons. We are not going to, as he said, we're not going to dive that much into specifics about all of the weapons, but we are going to briefly mention some of them and some of the aspects that are related to the combat system with those particular weapons. Additionally, we are going to speak about ninjutsu, magic, soul core abilities, and so on and so forth, due to the fact that they do influence combat system a lot.
Yeah, but let's not get too ahead of ourselves or repeat the same thing twice that we have already been talking about right now. Let's gradually build up from the very beginning of the combat system. On the surface level, on the basic level, I should say, the combat system consists of the fact that you'll be using various different stances, such as low stance, mid stance, and high stance, as well as there are certain skills which require of you to have your weapon sheathted or moved away. And afterwards you can use certain abilities. Most likely it's something that you need to hold on to a button, like a charge ability, before you need to release it, and then you'll perform some form of attack. In addition to that, there is also an element, I cannot talk about the combat system and not mention the fact that dodging and movement also ties in very well as various different buffs ties in very well with those kind of stances. For instance, when you are in low stance, the amount of stamina, aka ki, that you are using to perform various types of attacks are the lowest of all the other stands. Likewise, when you're running or dashing, you can cover great distance and not consume as much stamina as with any other stance. But the trade-off for it all is your attack may be the quickest. Yeah, they are actually the quickest out of all of it, but they are not doing as much damage as in mid stance or high stance. So that's your trade-off. Mid stance, again, on the surface level, is great for the most weapons, since it allows you to find a nice balance, at least basically, between the damaging attacks and the instances where you would like to block an incoming attack, or at least do not, if you're having any kind of a problem, to perform a key regeneration pulse, aka key pulse, in low stance, because the attack that you're doing are quicker. Maybe you will find it easier for you to perform those key pulses, which is again a vital part of the combat system. In mid or high stance, because the window for cancelling and or activating those key pulses or doing any other stuff is more generous, more widespread compared to the low stance. And finally, high stance is used mostly for dishing out great damage to the opponents. Again, that's only surface level. But the trade-off is that you'll consume the highest amount of ki possible, and also the fact that you are less likely to perform a good dodge in high stance. Instead of it being a good dodge, you'll actually perform some sort of Dark Souls roll, but it doesn't really work that well in this game. If your intentions were to dodge often, like let's say you're playing a light armor ninja build, you would like to be a highly maneuverable person rather than standing and blocking or taking a hit, chances are you are gonna be using high stance, less likely than any other stance in this game.
Additionally, those types of stances that you can use are influencing your overall skill usage. There are skills in the game that do more or less damage, or do pretty much the same amounts of damage, depending on to what stance will you going to attach them. Now, the game itself is not going to tell you which is which. So this is some additional information that you have to fish out yourself by reading manuals, guides, and stuff like that. Because yes, when it comes to how the game explains stuff, is believe it or not, there is a ton of text in the game, a ton, huge segments of text, but in reality, out of all of the text, it's 10% of it is actually viable, and the rest is either useless or confusing as hell, and vital information is not going to be explained to you at all. But yes, keep in mind that you have to know to which stance to attach which skills. Now, additionally, outside of those stances, you can use them again to perform the key pulls, but you can also use them to perform combos. And I'm going to be stating later on what I think about the whole combo situations. Yes, they are present, but their viability, we're going to discuss that a little bit later.
Yeah, so I agree with my brother on the sense that when it comes to combos, combo system, we'll talk about their usage is questionable when you're using some weapons in this game, especially slow to handle ones like axes and or odachi. But I would want to compliment Nioh 2 for being implementing such nuances, again developing on the first game, which with burst counter mechanics and soul core abilities. We're going to be mentioning them also. This is also a key part in how effective you'll be performing, you'll be feeling yourself and performing in combat, because with all that said, when it comes to those soul core abilities and burst counters, see, in Nioh 1, when you were committing to an attack and you were trading blows with an opponent, especially those who have higher percentages of hyper armor, you could not, or if you could, like, there were rare instances where you could actually interrupt them. In Nioh 2, they have done a step forward in the positive direction, allowing the players to successfully interrupt the enemies and or bosses when they are performing an attacks, and they are start glowing red, and you have like 3 different types of burst counter. That's the new mechanic. There's actually brute counter, the slowest and most easiest to use. You basically slap them when you're doing it. You also have feral counter. You perform a dash and you leave shadow clones of yourself, and when enemy hit those shadow clones, you immediately do like a counter attack afterwards, which does severe key damage, not necessarily hell damage, but key damage to an enemy, so keep this in mind. Additionally, there is like a parry counter, which is one of the most difficult one to use. You basically like stand there and you need a perfect timing for you to be able to perform this parry counter successfully. But the effect is still the same. When you're doing it, you are being rewarded with dealing huge key damage to an opponent.
Not only that, but also if you go into the your shifting skill tree, there are various abilities, well, not abilities, various upgrades that you can purchase there, such as like performing successful burst counter gives you like recovers your key. Performing successful burst counter gives you some form of a damage buff. Performing successful burst counter can heal you if your health is kind of running low or in critical condition, and all that kind of stuff. So mastering the burst counter in this game is vital, but there are more uses besides like receiving those buffs and interrupting bosses' attacks, bosses and enemies' attack, as well as like doing huge key damage to them. There is more to that, and that is related to magic and ninjutsu. So burst counter, view it not only as those already mentioned things, but also as a frame reset sort of thing. You can cancel some of your frames of animation or frames of recovery by using a burst counter. This in return allows something like feather spamming or spell spamming sort of stuff, like removing frames of your attack when you are like attacking the enemy with skill or something like that. You can just interrupt it immediately, and you will not going to be punished. One of the examples of this on a pretty simple move for which you in Nioh 1 could have been punished severely is Grapple Attack on Kusarigama. So it's very slow on startup and very slow on recovery. It hooks your enemy or you towards the enemy. If you miss that attack in Nioh 1, what would end up happening, unless you have a living weapon ready, if you miss that, you are punished for that severely, maybe even killed. If here the same situation happened, you missed, you pressed the burst counter, boom, you are still safe. Like in most cases you are still safe, and that works with pretty much almost all of the abilities, almost everything, but there is still a drawback on feral as well as on the I forgot that Parry one.
Yeah, Parry Counter, you can name
on
it
the
Parry Counter.
Parry Counter, basically on 2 out of 3 burst counters there is a negative drawback, such as after like you performing that burst counter, you are being stuck in that transformed state of yours for like 0.5 to 1 second, so keep that in mind. So it's like, yeah, you can spam, but do keep in mind that there is a drawback to it.
Well, yeah, that's the major positive when it comes to Nioh 2. I mean, more safety net, quote-unquote, I could say it like that for you. More room to save yourself if you screw up in your offense and you want to desperately desperately get away from the opponent or interrupt his most damaging attacks. There is another possibility for you to do it, not directly via the usage of burst counters, but via the usage of some active abilities of the soul cores. You see, burst counter, it's one caveat, one way to look at it, but soul cores, for me at least, when I was playing it, I found the most usable outcome for them that I can benefit from is to activate them when you want to continue your pressure. What do I mean by that? Let's say I'm pressuring my opponent, I'm hitting them, but I'm running out of ki slowly but surely, either by me simply hitting him or by trying to catch up with him, and he wants to take his turn to retaliate, right? To perform his attacks, his or her magical spells, and so on and so forth. I can just press on the button, and then certain abilities can not only do damage to him, and they can also stagger him. Of course, they too come with a trade-off. I mean, one trade-off that we haven't mentioned is the fact that both your burst counters and the usage of your soul core abilities uses that purple meter that you are seeing below your key bar. This meter called Anima, you didn't have it in Nioh 1, this is something that they have added to Nioh 2. Again, this is a positive thing, like we have mentioned. But returning to those soul core abilities, with which you can interrupt certain enemies and or bosses, you need to keep in mind that it's trial and error practice. What do I mean by that? In due time, you will realize even those abilities like Ippon Tatara, when I'm jumping with a giant hammer and smashing my opponent's head, or Gozuki Soul Core, which is one of the best for intercepting enemies, certain monsters or bosses will be practically immune to them. Yes, they provide you with frames of invincibility. You can use it again as a sort of, like this, for instance. I dodged the burst counter of his attack, of his Kusarigama attack, by performing an Ippon Tatara hammer blow. However, certain attacks and certain types of enemies can simply ignore the stagger effect and attack right through it. So you need to memorize, I'd say, like through trial and error, memorize whom you can counterattack and against whom it's dangerous to do so.
I would want to point out another usage, or not another usage, but basically another usage and another benefit of using certain soul core abilities. Certain soul core abilities, primarily if you take Ippon Tatara as an example here. So seeing that an enemy is going to, say for example, do some form of a combo attack on you, or some kind of damaging move on you, and you see that maybe your HPs will not going to be enough to tank this one out, using Ippon Tatara, for example, will allow you to have certain damage mitigation, so to speak. So you will not going to receive full damage, you will going to receive partial damage from those attacks, which is extremely vital and important in those situations where you just want to avoid unnecessary damage numbers from the enemy. Also, another one of those uses is if you time it good, you can dodge the command grabs of the enemy by using some soul core abilities. Again, I'm mentioning some because there are many soul core abilities. We haven't tested every single one of them, but say for example, again, Ippon Tatara will allow you to dodge the enemy's command grabs if you time it correctly. By just timing correctly, you can avoid it. So definitely biggest improvements are those Soul Core's abilities and also those burst counter abilities, because yes, like first game had problems with not having those, and them adding those things actually made it a lot easier. Like, I personally consider this game to be a lot easier compared to Nioh 1, like, because of the fact that there are those already mentioned things. Because those already mentioned things do add a lot of benefit to the combat potential of your character. By avoiding those recovery frames, by avoiding those attacks, by damage mitigating the enemy's attacks, you can achieve a lot. Believe it or not, you will be using that pretty much constantly as you're going to be playing this game.
Yeah, like, it's in your best interest to get used to those kind of skills and abilities, because otherwise you will have major problems, especially if your goal is to play after, like, if your goal is to play further than the first difficulty, to complete the game further than the first difficulty. Anyway, moving back to the whole combat mechanics aspect. So another point that I would like to compliment, outside of having multiple skills depending on the stances, like my brother said, the stuff that I haven't even realized myself after 200 hours of playing, that certain skills and certain stances do more damage than the others. We also forgot to mention that you can attune certain passives, which will further increase the effectiveness of your skill, be it damage dealt to the health of the enemies, inflict them with certain magical status like burn, water, and so on and so forth, dealing extra ki damage, allowing you to recover more ki in exchange for some penalty, and so on and so forth. This whole highly customizable thing, at least in the surface level, provides you with some good boost to your character's potential and to the overall combat.
It's also the fact that it adds variety, but do keep in mind that even though you are going to attach those skills to, like, those buffs to your skills, do not expect to see like some tremendous damage numbers on them. They do give you a boost, but it is not the boost on the level of like, oh my god, it's like increasing damage so much. No. It's nothing like that. If you want to see big damage numbers, that mostly going to be related to the gear, to the synergy of sets and graces and all that kind of stuff. Stats are just like, they're additional thing that will going to boost you, but they are not like those like core things. But before going into like completely different topic related to the burst counter and to the shift, we also would like to discuss something about Yokai Transformation, because it is also a new mechanic, but it has problems.
Well, Yokai Transformation, you see, I personally, what can I say about Yokai Transformation in general? So this, think about it as the Nioh 2 equivalent to Living Weapon, quote unquote equivalent, of course. On the surface level, it allows you to have some invulnerability frames. When you are activating this Yokai Transformation, it transforms your character into Yokai, like in the trailer, in the main trailer. Your attacks will be able to generate more anima when you're hitting the enemy. You will be able to also receive some of the passive buffs, which could be unlocked by leveling certain passive abilities or active abilities in your shifting skill tree. However, what I personally find out through trial and error, through vast practice, vast experience, playing this game, it's not as powerful as Living Weapon.
It's nowhere near as powerful
because
and versatile.
The problem is that you don't have as much, how should I put, hyper armor when you're activating your shifting tree, because enemies can easily can grab you and attack you easier and way faster compared to Living Weapon in Nioh 1. Secondly, it also vanishes quite rapidly, even if you even if you were to max out fully all of your passive that will allow you to prolong the duration of your yokai shift. In the end game, like end game mode, like Dream of the Nioh, Underworld, and Depths, it takes 1 to 2 hits to knock you out from your fully charged yokai shift all the way back to being like a normal person.
It's also important to understand that unlike Living Weapon, when it comes to like transforming into yokai, it doesn't matter what kind of weapon do you have equipped. Say for example, like, yes, transforming into one of those 3 yokai forms, depending on what yokai form did you choose, yeah, it will give you like sort of somewhat a new moveset, but unfortunately it's nowhere near as versatile and practical as Living Weapon. Plus, say for example, you are fond of, I don't know, playing with Tonfas or something like that, but you choose to go with shifting gameplay, like you will going to be using shifting most oftenly. But it doesn't really matter whether or not you will going to have Tonfas or X or something like that. You're always going to be, when transformed into yokai, you're always going to be using whatever that yokai has in his hand, like a club, 2 daggers, or that thingy, like, I don't know, like a shield or something. That's the one that uses Parry wields. And also, outside of that, like, it was easier in Nioh 1 to make a build that is going to be focused around Living Weapon, and that build would be practical and powerful. Here, I personally don't think that it is possible to get the same amount of benefit of, like, you have to find like graces and sets that will benefit you.
It's not about thinking of the possibilities. It's impossible to perform. People were trying to do something similar to the Living Weapon builds, aka like shifter builds in Nioh 2. It's impossible. Again, due to the fact that shifter form is not as powerful and it vanishes pretty rapidly and it's hard to sustain, self-sustain, it's
yeah, and it's also the fact that you are going to be losing anima as well, like.
It's even when you are, even if you were to combine multiple sources to generate anima rapidly, it's pretty hard to pull off something similar to the Living Weapon builds in Nioh 1. So in my opinion, I can say, like, think about while again on the positive side of things, yes, we mentioned the fact that there is like 3 different forms of those shifters, and you can wobble around with them. I'd say on the first difficulty, it's gonna be more fun to use it, as the effect of the shifter is quite powerful against certain enemies, even against bosses. But the higher you go through the difficulties, the more you start to understand that shifting, it's more so like an extra life, a panic button to give you a couple of invulnerability frames, and that's pretty much it. Like, even in some of my footages when I used it, the major bulk of damage will never ever going to go through shifting forms, so that's pretty much it.
And another downside of that shifting forms, and yes, like, on initial difficulties you can play around with various ones, but as you will going to go into the higher difficulties and you will going to start like getting yourself towards a build that you will want to play, towards a specific damage type with which you want to play, say for example you want to play with Purity, well, unfortunately, bad news for you, you are only going to be stuck with the yokai shift that is going to be working with parries, because only the parry yokai shift has plus, I believe, 20% damage multiplier against purified enemies. Only that one.
Well, you could play with other things,
Well,
but,
you could, but you lose potential.
You lose damage, yeah. You lose the quite high. You lose some damage when it comes to switching off and selecting not optimal soul cores. But that's already like another topic that we'll probably discuss later. Moving on to, I'd say, like the bulk of the discussion when it comes to the combat, I would want to talk about, well, again, the positives you already heard. The development of the Nioh 2 combat, the way that it take something that was already present, like those stances were present, but they have added value on by giving you the option to cancel safely with the usage of your burst counters, with the usage of soul core abilities from various different moves that your weapon has, or even with magic and or ninjutsu. There's also the fact that you can tune in more, I believe, in the second game, those extra passives that you level up through the samurai skill tree, the ones that we talked about, gives you additional benefits. That's all on the positive side of things. And again, on the surface level, this combat might feels overwhelming, but I would want to transition to the stuff that I had personal hands-on experience, and that is it's only on the surface level. What do I mean by that? It's again both on the positive and on the negative side of things. It can be quite challenging at first to understand all of those nuances, to think that you might need to utilize all stances effectively at the beginning or with all the weapons, but it's actually not the case. And here I am going to talk about the experience that I have and many other users have when playing with the slow two-handed weapons like Odachi or Axe. So I played with an axe only on the first difficulty, from the very first mission all the way up until the very end, completed every secondary mission, twilight mission, and so on and so forth. Now, when I played axe, I have tested out, I have seen what it can do from the low stance and from mid stance when it comes to damage to the health of the enemies, damage to the ki of the enemies, and its general startup frames, general recovery frames, and so on and so forth. Now, the problem is that even on the first difficulty, and this problem became even more noticeable the higher you go throughout those regions and throughout from main campaign you transition to the DLC. X is incredibly slow when it comes to startup frames and recovery frames. Now, the caveat or the positive side of things, yes, it does a lot of damage. But the problem in the combat system of Nioh 2 that some people may simply try to forget that it exists, or they are using any other stuff that can either ignore or bypass through it, like spell builds and so on and so forth. Like if you were to play with a slow weapon like Axe and Todachi, and you're going to fight somebody who has quite fast moveset, tons of hyper armor, and when you attack him, even when he or she is blocking or just standing there, he receives a hit but he doesn't react and immediately goes to a counterattack, it's almost impossible to safely block or get away from him. Of course, if you have a source of like infinite anima gain that will allow you to just spam some sort of abilities, aka like this elemental tornado that transforms you and you're getting away from the enemy, or feral counter, that would be one thing. But more often than not, what would happen is, because damage that X is providing to a player, like in mid stance and in high stance when you're doing it to the enemy, and in low stance, it's almost non-existent. So you're locked in doing most of your attacks in high stance. But like I've told you before, in high stance, when you are striking the enemy, nobody stops, like, even if you hit them head on, like, your attack is not blocked, then the next thing that could happen is he goes for a vicious counter attack, like a combo of his own, and you're dead. As simple as that. Like, even if you play with, like, heavy armor, like in my case, I was using heavy armor on my first playthrough, Axe depletes your stamina quite rapidly, and when the enemy strikes you, you also lose some portion of it. So again, more often than not, if you have seen, or you can check also footages of my playthrough from the first difficulty, it's pretty hard to maintain any kind of good pressure on the enemy that could simply retaliate through your offense. Which leads me to another topic. And that is, and again, this is why I'm also probably I'm on the minority, as well as many others who think that slow weapons in the Nioh 2 and the Nioh 1 game is not so powerful compared to fast weapons, even though in theory, like on paper, they are the greatest source of ki or health damage. Again, examples include Odachi and Axe. But the reality, the combat itself quickly proves you wrong because of the fact that there is no major hit advantage. There is no hit advantage at all. Which is why I do not understand another position of those who compares Nioh 2 combat system to a fighting game. Now, in a fighting game, in a good fighting game, each time you strike an enemy, either with a light or a heavy attack, there is a thing called hit advantage. What does it mean? It's basically frames that are going immediately after the hit has been done. You have certain amount of frames to continue your pressure by performing certain attacks of your own. For instance, like, let's say if I hit my opponent with a heavy attack, chances are I can hit them not necessarily with another heavy attack, but with medium or light attack, and so on and so forth. In Nioh 2, there is no such thing. Even if you hit enemies like head-on with heavy attack from high stance, which is, in case you have forgotten, we talked about it, that's the most damaging stance out of all of them. Enemies can simply take the hit and say, okay, that's not flinch at all, and say, that's my turn to strike you down or do massive amount of damage, and you'll be either dead or forced to use quick change scroll to resurrect.
Yes, this is a big problem. And this is a big problem because, for the most part, it is pretty much like there is no reliable way for a person to understand where is the safe zone within like all of that. And even if the enemy is going to be debuffed with like lightning and slot talisman at the same time, and you're still going to be hitting him like head on with your multiple attacks, like multi-hitting attacks or heavy attacks or whatever stuff that you're going to do, this doesn't mean that whenever he wants, he cannot like strike you back. He can do it whenever he wants. It doesn't matter how hard you're going to be hitting him. It doesn't matter how many attacks are in your combo. He's just going to go and hit you, And slow weapons in this game outside of Axe include also Kusarigama. Because, like, believe it or not, here is a good example of why and how this weapon is actually slow. Most of your skills and attacks are way slower than whatever the enemy can pull off. The example that would prove something that this weapon is kind of slow is a fight against, let's say, like Nobunaga or that Saito Yoshitatsu, Saito Toshimitsu, with the guy with the mage with the
Toshimitsu.
With Odachi. Yep. So he's being debuffed with lightning and slot talisman at the same time. I'm standing head on face to face with him. I'm doing my light combo from the high stance. What does he do? He does under two of the most powerful debuffs. He just goes and trades blows with me. He does his attack faster than me, and he just doesn't care about anything. Like, the instances where enemies will just not going to give a damn about whatever the hell you're doing is like, it's all over the place. Pretty much a lot of those enemies and bosses in Nioh 2 can be split in two categories. Dummies, against whom you can literally get into their face and start mashing them down and they will not going to do anything, and those who don't care about anything. Those who, like, you come into them, you start attacking them with anything, they just retaliate back. In the middle of your attack, like, they still being hit in the face, and in the same time, they hit you back. Like, I don't know how someone does compare this to a fighting game. Would you ever want to play a fighting game where basically, when you are on the offense, it's your turn to strike, you hit the enemy, and at the same time when you hit the enemy hits you back. It's like, what is this cartoon thing when like two people are standing and like they like whiff in the air and like hit each other at the same time? Like, wow. Like, I cannot compare this game to a fighting game. It is impossible, because frames of advantage, there is no such thing. Enemies attacking you while it's your turn, like, it's mind-blowing, and it's strange, and it makes it like there was another thing that they were saying, like, oh, it's unpredictable. It's like in fighting game, it's always unpredictable. Well, of course it's unpredictable when you cannot predict whether or not, at this particular instance, where last time, say for example, he didn't attack you while you were attacking him, and next time he attacks you while receiving full-on damage to the face. Like,
wait a second. When they're talking unpredictability, that's total BS from my opinion. First of all, because if you don't know when it comes to fighting game, at least if you don't know the matchup, if you don't know what character does, then yes, maybe you might have some problems. And we're talking right now about hit advantage and the way how it doesn't really work in Nioh. Whereas in a fighting game, you don't have any instances unless opponent use some kind of a break, some kind of an option to push you away by not receiving any damage, but usually it costs heavily on the resources.
Yeah, special moves or something like that,
yeah,
powered moves.
But that's not the same as to say, like, when you're striking an enemy in a fighting game, you are realizing your hit advantage, you are pressuring him until the combo ends. He cannot do anything to you. That's your turn. That's your reward for opening him up. In Nioh 2, unless you're talking about, like in this instance, okay, I depleted enemy from I transferred his key to a red status, and then he flinches from any kind of attacks. But when it comes to everything else, like certain enemies can be literally like a living thing. They can ignore practically everything outside of certain cases.
This is especially visible when you fight any kind of human boss.
Yeah, like Ipondatara, or excuse me, there is like only certain stuff that you can do against them, like Ipondatara Hammer Blow or Gozuki, to stagger them. But human bosses, especially, and certain yokai bosses too, they have this nasty habit of, in the midst of your pressure, even if you are hitting them with those moves, oh, it's my turn, here is like a giant combo or a move that does like 80% to your health as a damage, and enjoy it. For why? Like, for what reason? And you have to also understand the tempo. I mean, you're clearly seeing that the tempo of this game, like, it's maybe, of course, it's maybe it's not as quick as Ninja Gaiden games or Devil May Cry games or old God of War games, but it's way quicker than Dark Souls games. And to keep up with this pace, in my opinion, slow two-handed weapons like Odachi and Axe, they need to have either to be, not necessarily to be, I hate this word when being viable, I'm gonna talk about it later, when it comes to viability of certain weapons. They need to have certain distinct feature to make it worthwhile using so. In my opinion, both Axe and Odachi lacks this kind of feature. Because yes, on paper, once again, like on paper, Odachi and Axe, like, those are the weapons that are doing massive amounts of either health damage or key damage to the enemy. But in practice, we have the some counter powers, which not only is more safe to use than those mentioned attack weapons earlier, but it's also like super. They are allowing you to pressure enemies in a more reliable way. There is no visible gaps that enemies can use against you. Oh, another thing, by the way, I forgot to mention when it comes to X example. So there's like two, when you're using a heavy attack from a high stance in X, you are doing these two strikes. And unless you have anima meter, you cannot cancel out of it. Anima meter or the shifting ability. Being fully charged, you can cancel safely out of it. Well, the problem is that not only there is a gap before you strike the opponent, after the first strike lands, after the second strike lands, there is also huge recovery issue. Again, already when the attack is finished and in between. Why is this important, you might ask? Well, again, if you're fighting a relatively quick, not insanely fast opponent, but a relatively quick opponent, each time there is a gap, you're gonna be knocked out of it. He or she or it will abuse this gap to a full extent, and you'll be questioning, like, why the hell, even if you landed an attack, the next thing what will happen, they're gonna counterattack you straight up front, and you are gonna ask yourself constantly, why do I like invest my resources into this attack when I didn't receive any huge reward? And some of you might argue, well, that's the caveat that you are going to pay if you use those kinds of weapons. That's the trade-off for it being so slow. It needs to have a gap for the sake of balancing. And in my opinion, that's already, that's again a BS. Why? Because you are already paying with the slow-ass frames, with the slow-ass recovery, with gaps all over the place, with the fact that each faster enemy are going to abuse this gap and use it against you, and you cannot play neutral in this game, and you cannot play neutral aka footsies, you cannot realize any kind of pressure because there is no hit advantage. Like, what's the freaking point of hitting enemy with a heavy attack with a slow weapon if the next second all he does is like 1-2, 1-2, 1-2 combo, you're dead? Like, where is the reward here? Compare it to something like fists, or okay, fists. In my example, I'm using dual swords. At least, even if it's not an overpowered weapon, at least the pressure that I am capable of maintaining, and even though the dual swords also have gaps, but it's not as blatantly obvious compared to X or dual swords.
Well, I mean, at least when it comes to like advantage in all that situation, is at least on X you visibly can see that you actually have some gaps. Take for example Kusarigama. Everyone is like praising the light attack from heavy stance on Kusarigama, but it isn't perfect. As a matter of fact, it looks like you have no gaps in between those attacks when you are using it. But in reality, you actually do, because considering the fact that if we live in a world where the system of the Nioh to like hit advantage and all that kind of stuff is perfect, then what would end up happening, like yeah, if there are no gaps, then enemies could not like hit me out of it. But no, they do. In the middle of attack, like that's light attack is a multi-hit attack that consists of pretty much like almost 8 attacks, but after pretty much third attack from that multi-hit attack combo, enemies can hit you out of it, like they can start hitting you, and there is no visible indication that you have a hole there where they can attack you. The same goes to say about multi-hitting skills of Kusarigama, such as Renegade Dragon, such as Blade Spin and stuff like that. You pretty much have no gap in between those attacks, so they all have to like land, and after that the opponent can strike you. No, the opponent strikes you while you're doing that. And as a matter of fact, Renegade Dragon attacks enemies slower, yet, on the other hand, even though it's a multi-hit attack, that attacks slower. It is safer, somehow safer, even though the time between each attack in that string of attacks in that skill is actually like longer. It is safer than a move that is faster, that also is a multi-hit attack, but the enemy can hit you out of it anyway. And from one thing and from another thing, it's just that the slower move in that instance is actually safer. Like, why? Why is it like that? Why couldn't they implement, again, this is a problem that goes from Nioh 1 basically and all the way into Nioh 2, which is, again, if we are on the topic like of hyper armor and hit advantage, why wouldn't they implement a visual and a sound indication like in the same time? Like, you have it, like, you understand that now he's going to attack me. No, you have to, among everything that is happening on the screen, and when you buff yourself, you use familiars, the screen is pretty chaotic and the combat is pretty fast and chaotic. You just cannot see if, especially if you're using multi-hit attack, it's freaking hard to see if the enemy actually, like, is he doing some kind of retaliation attack? But how can he do this if it's my turn? I don't understand. Like, I have to legit stop myself. Like, oh yeah, I was waiting for receiving my turn for, like, say for example, for like 10 seconds or so. I received my turn. Bam, I need to, like, 1 second later, I need to stop my offense completely, because, hey, he steals my turn while it's my turn. Like, he doesn't do anything, he just retaliates back. And also, keep in mind that, yes, I have to completely stop, because I am also a light armor user, who can block for shit, and who is always forced to, like, if the enemy hits me like 1 or 2 attack, I'm dead. So I cannot even, like, I cannot block, because light armor users do not block. They simply have to, like, dodge away. That's like, wait 10 seconds, get a turn, 1 second later, run away like crazy, because you got robbed. Basically, I cannot call this anything but robbery, and it's stupid, and it's very hard to get accustomed to. It's possible to get accustomed to, but it's still BS, in my personal opinion.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you totally. In my opinion, that's the... even if they added somewhere in the future, like in possible Nioh 3's visual and audio cue that an enemy is going to attack you and or he has hyper armor,
yeah, like most normal games
chances are it still is not going to be a full it's only going to be a partial solution to the problem, because of no hit advantage. Again, you have to have hit advantage. Take a look at those games. Again, like, I hate to bring, like, the comparison, but since we're on the combat system topic, I can enumerate different games to give you a better perspective of where to look at better implementation of certain abilities. Like, you look at Devil May Cry, like 5 or 3 or 4, whatever the case might be. There, if you use, even God of War, there if you use slow weapon, if you hit the target successfully, you are going to realize major hit advantage, which will result in you continuing your pressure. And likewise, the same thing works for the enemy. I forgot to talk about this. The rule with what works for a player doesn't work, or what is restricted for a player is not restrictive at all for the enemies or bosses in Nioh, but hey, that's we're gonna talk about it later. So yeah, in Devil May Cry and God of War, and even in Ninja Gaiden from the same freaking studio, where you are wielding and using a slow weapon, you are realizing some kind of hit advantage when you're striking the opponent. Especially worthwhile, like if you're using most damaging weapon, like even Dark Souls, for example. You are striking a boss, like, with a giant club, with a giant two-handed something, and even if it's like a normal-sized boss or something bigger than you, not necessarily a giant, not like you're the giant, something bigger than you, he may flinch a couple of times. Sometimes, like 1 out of 3 attacks, which is going to result in you developing your pressure. In Nioh 2, each time when I was using an axe, I feel like I'm playing as a cripple, because enemies are moving like with a supersonic speed all the time. They are even those even faster ones, which is a major gripe that I have. Why the f faster enemies who's like giants in Nioh 2 moves like with the speed of light and do not obey by their own rules, but that's another caveat. While in games like, again, Devil May Cry, Dark Souls, and so on and so forth, Ninja Gaiden, God of War, using slow weapon, yes, you are already at a disadvantage because of your startup frames and recovery frames, but if you land a hit, oh boy, you are damn right that it's gonna strike hard at the enemy and it's gonna result in the severe hit advantage. Nioh, no such thing exists. Some people may say, well, that would be too broken because other people are going to...
That would be too boring also.
Yeah, too boring, too broken, hit the enemy. Nobody's talking about... Hold up a second. Nobody's talking about hitting enemies non-stop. We're not on that topic. I understand that you need to have some form of tactical and or strategical approach to each individual fight. Fight against one enemy, fight against multiple enemies sometimes. But it's not about the fact that it's gonna be like too boring or not. The fact of the matter is, like, the objective thing is that when you hit an enemy with a slow weapon, there is no hit advantage. Enemies can take their turns and bosses especially, whenever the in hell they want, unless you're talking about those instances when their key is depleted. So, and on top of that, they do not obey to the rules that the game is present. What do I mean by that? Humanoid enemies, and even certain yokai bosses, even if their key is red, can still strike. Like, I was fighting against Saito, two examples, Tati Iboshi and Saito Toshimitsu. I depleted his key to the red. He didn't flinch, he wasn't transformed to the wind state. Next thing happened, he charged his spell at me, the second, which gives him millions of hits of invulnerability. The only thing that I can do something about it is to avoid that because I cannot intercept it. And the next thing, he takes his turn. His key already regenerated massively. Iboshi, the same thing. Okay, I depleted her key, now it's my turn to strike. Okay, her key is red. I'm trying to develop some kind of pressure. What do I get? 1 second window of opportunity, because next thing she does, she transforms into the shadow state. Wow, great advantage that I provide. And that happened, by the way, on the first difficulty. And those of you who haven't played this game, the higher the difficulty goes, the faster the enemies become. Not over... Okay, if you're using a relatively fast weapon, it's manageable. But with slow weapon, good luck playing through those kinds of challenges.
Well, with reasonably slow weapon, because I also played this game from start to finish with a slow weapon, and in first game I played with a slow weapon, but it goes without saying that if you're going to be playing something like, I don't know, like Kusarigama or an X or something like that, where you can, like, you may have those multi-hit attacks, but you do not have reliable ways to... Like, say for example, if there was no such thing as those frame cancelling options that the game provides you with here, this would be a pain in the ass, and I would not have played with Kusarigama, because again, as I said, like, as a light armor user and as a Kusarigama user, I had to go especially against humanoid bosses who have tremendous amounts of ki, and again, like, some people were trying to defend this game when it comes to, like, well, logic doesn't work with those, like, yokai enemies and bosses because of the fact that they are not humans. Well, dear defenders, I want to ask a question. Why in the world where demons can be put down much faster on the ground, despite them need to have like more ki and ki regen, in the same world where this can happen, the enemies who are humanoid bosses have twice as much ki regen, and it's harder to put them down without some kind of cheese strat or without using chaos build. Like, this is the reason also, like, one of the reasons why I use cheese strats such as grab the enemy to me with the Kusarigama, knock him on her ass, and use a finisher move, then like repeat the procedure, use a little bit of Renegade Dragon in those instances, because here's the fact, like, Kusarigama is the kind of weapon with which you cannot reliably fight against an enemy by, like, fighting him full-on face-to-face. It's not fists, it's not tonfas, it's not a single, like, katana or something like that. Like, your moves are very slow in startup, your skills are very slow in startup, everything is very slow, and everything has those invisible gaps, well, or maybe it doesn't even have those gaps, it's just that the enemy will going to strike you no matter what. But the point of the matter is, to each their own experience. If some were using already like busted weapons such as fists and tonfas and stuff like that, for them those fights would be much easier. But as for me, as a Kusarigama user, I had much easier time fighting against yokais, like, because apparently shredding them down and just smashing them with auto attacks somehow kinda works, not always, they still will retaliate sometimes, but against humans, it's a pain in the fucking ass, like, come on, like, it's always, yeah, I want to pressure him to show that, like, I can fight him, like, more or less legit, so that it would be interesting for me and for those who might be watching this. Nope. I tried this, he immediately, like, 3 attacks after my multi-hit light attack from heavy stance. Here's a combo for you, oh, you're dead because you're wearing light armor, oh, you won your turn, oh, 1 second later you have to retaliate. Nah, it's so dumb, and I don't think that it should have been this way. Because with some weapons, it isn't like this. With some weapons, you can move away, but no, like, hit advantage still doesn't exist no matter what kind of weapon you are going to be playing with. Like, me and my brother saw a streamer who was doing, like, Stone of Penance 9 with, like...
Depths at level 21.
Depths 21. He was fighting against Nobunaga with fists, he was pressuring him, he was doing all sorts of things. And all of that basically ended with Nobunaga doing his, like, light attack with sword. He just one tap with light attack, and that's a one-shot. Here's also a problem, that not only hit advantage doesn't exist, but retarded amounts of damage against a character from bosses exists, and it's just over the top. If you're a light armor user on higher difficulties with high Stone of Penance, one tap, you're dead.
No, that's not only this, it's the fact that when it comes to combat system in general, like, the way how skills, there are a lot of similar skills across multiple weapons, which shares more or less the same properties, but it's just, one of them is clearly better than the others. I mean, my brother said that he had way easier time fighting against yokais with Kusarigama than I was doing with axe or with dual swords. But when he struggled against humans, for me it was the other way around. Of course, certain humans are cheap, like Saito Toshimitsu, I'm looking at you, but the problem is that when you start to test multiple weapons yourselves, especially their moveset, the skills that they have, you see that they have blatant similarities between them. But let's take an example when it comes to combat system. We are gonna be looking at skills such as Reaper with Kusarigama, Water Sword with dual swords, and Spinning Dragon, I don't know, I forgot how it's called, you know, with the split staff, when he is walking and he's doing those slaps. So, I can tell you straight up front that out of those three skills are used in the same way. You hold L1, well, on DualShock, you hold the L1 button, you press triangle. It typically involves you being in high stance. On Kusarigama, I believe it's in low stance. Correct me if I'm...
no, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't... Oh, okay, you can do it in all the stances. So you hold L1, you press triangle. And then the attacks are happening. Well, turns out that out of all those are all three similar skills. The one which uses Split Staff does the most amount of damage. Per hit, I wasn't even kidding you. Per hit, I was doing 7,000 damage per hit, per one freaking hit. I was doing, with Water Sword, I was doing somewhere between, like, depending on whether or not I proc the watery debuff on my enemy, from 2,800 all the way up until, like, 4,500 damage. I don't know, what's your damage numbers when you were attacking with Reaper?
It depends on whether or not, like, a confusion state happens or
Without
not.
confusion, I mean, just...
Well, something like 2.5 to 5k damage.
So it's somewhere around, like, Water Sword level. But the trade-off for you, at least, that I have seen in your playthrough, your Reaper skill was doing more key damage, alongside with Hell. So Water Sword is compared to, like, the same skill with Split Staff or Reaper with Kusarigama. It's worse. It's worse than that. Not only that, but I don't know. Can you safely cancel from the Reaper? Can you actually? Is there some kind of follow-up?
You can stop it whenever you want.
You can. Okay. He can stop. My brother could stop Reaper channeling skill. Yeah, that's the word that I was trying to remember. Channeling skill, whatever he wanted. I cannot do so with Water Sword. Why? I mean, it's not... I would understand if this skill on the Split Staff...
Yeah, well, because Water Sword, in the end of the Water Sword, when you stop it, for some reason, they slapped in the...
Additional attack,
which has the different animation.
And does puny damage.
Yeah, so with Reaper, how it goes, you stand, and you just keep on slashing, like you are spinning that... blade part of the Kusarigama, like, and you slash the enemy, and it goes like from start to finish until your key is depleted or you stop it. It's the same animation for dual swords. At the end, you get the different animation, so this is why you have to, like, wait till it goes away.
Yeah, and when it comes to Split Staff, you know that Dragon Stance, or however it's called, forgot the proper name. You not only can cancel at any given time safely the skill, you can also move when you're doing this skill. Why is that important, you might ask? Well, because some enemies, again, returning to the combat system, they have, not only that, they have a wake-up attack. Depending on their speed and their type of wake-up attack, they can intercept your channeling skill. Typically, when you're doing those channeling abilities, you do them when enemies have longer-ish frames of recovery, and good instance of that would be when you are knocking them down on their feet, they're falling down, before they get up, you activate your channeling skill. Well, again, you'll be punished heavily for that when you're doing something like Water Sword or Reaper, because you're standing still in one place. But with Dragon Stance, I can move away, I can move forwards, I can cancel at any given time. Another thing is the fact that I can cover more distance. Remember I talked about that wake-up attack, that they have like some areas around them could be dangerous to stay, like an Endra, for example. When it gets up, it does this fiery tornado, and depending on the distance, it could hit you. You will not gonna get, like, if you stand, you don't have to even stand perfectly. If you stand away with a certain distance from an Endra, you can safely do this channeling skill, and you'll be good to go. Like, you'll be doing tons of damage and being safe. So
to me, it's more like I see an advantage more in the fact that you can move. Not so that you can, like, reposition yourself from the enemy who rises up, but mostly what's the problem that I find with Reaper against most of the enemies, and that they kinda nerfed Kusarigama's Reaper skill from Nioh 1 in certain aspect, is that the pushback, when you are hitting the enemy with the Reaper skill, there is a pushback. Like, every time you hit him, he is being slowly pushed back. It doesn't work on all of the bosses, on all of the enemies. Against certain ones it does, against certain ones it doesn't. Against certain ones it's more of a pushback that happens, against the others much less. However, I would prefer to be able to move so that when I use this skill, I am not standing there like an idiot whiffing at the air because the enemy all of a sudden was a little bit pushed away and I cannot reach him. And for me to reach him, like, I have to stop, I have to get closer, but I cannot do this like against a boss. I cannot do this like properly because he is going to retaliate. He's going to retaliate, so I have to like wait for my opportunity. But this wasn't exactly like the... There is a way to get rid of this, like if you get the boss, say for example, fight against him closer to the corner, so that when he's being pushed back, he is being pushed back into the wall, and thus there is like the distance between you doesn't increase. But we are speaking about a Souls game where we all know that Souls games cameras are,
element that implies
trash, and if for example he's going to reposition himself and all you're going to see afterwards is going to be his crutch, yeah, good fucking luck fighting against that thing then. So I would rather prefer to have the ability to move a little, like to be able to move while doing that skill. It's not like you're it's logically this Kusarigama doesn't weigh a ton, so you not being able to just move and do this thing looks stupid. It's like you're being locked in place. Why am I locked in place? Like, this makes no sense, and it makes the skill worthless in a lot of situations, while in other situations, it's freaking one of the best. Like, example, given I was struggling with Otakimaru, fighting his phases, apparently the best, absolute best skill on Kusarigama that destroys that guy, destroys his ki, and destroys the whole fight is actually Reaper. Like, fuck Light's attack from high stance. Renegade Dragon, I don't need you. I just need a Reaper. I go to the boss and I start slashing him, and it works perfectly.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Like, it's both. I mean, one thing I want to mention is like your problem is already resolved in this Dragon Stance from Dragon Dance. Yeah, that's I remember. Dragon Dance from the Split Staff. You are saying that you rather have an ability to move when you're doing this channeling skill. Well, you already has this on the Dragon Dance. Well, not only move, but it also, despite those channeling skills pushing enemies away from you, it doesn't matter with the split staff because it covers insane amounts of ground.
Like, yeah, well, here is then the problem with how they make basically. It's kind of strange. So when we make a new weapon, we create a new weapon, right? But how do we do skills for that? Well, we are going to grab the old skills from the other weapons
and make it 10 times better.
Yeah, but then there is freaking visible difference of why one weapon is going to be way worse than the other one. Even though we are going to be practically using the same skill, I will be at a disadvantage just because my weapon is old. My weapon didn't receive jack shit of an updates. It actually received nerfs from first game. And your weapon, because it's new, it's actually 10 times better. That's really tough to like bear, because it's annoying.
It's balancing.
Well, balancing.
That's BS. You know,
like
that could be
fuck their balance. Like they nerfed to the ground ninjutsu in Nioh 1, and in Nioh 2, it's blatantly like really powerful, especially with those frame canceling things, and they just don't give a damn about it. It's powerful, and it will stay powerful, and they will not going to do anything without it.
Yeah, the thing, it's not all. In my opinion, it's not. It might seem that it's like all the negative, but here's the good thing about it all. The good thing about this all is that you don't have to be.
The good thing is that
you don't have to be a prisoner of who uses only like one type of weapon. What do I mean by that? And only like certain movesets. That's the thing. Like you could easily switch, and on the higher difficulties, it's even more easier due to the fact that you will be acquiring weapon points faster. At least if you haven't, if you didn't collected your gray set yet, you could easily switch from one weapon to another, and thusly you'll be having more fun, and your character will be more powerful than before. Like, from my opinion, I don't understand purists who are trying to justify, at least, like, if he or she said that, okay, I know that my weapon has severe disadvantages, but I just like this moveset over any other moveset that other weapons have, so I'm gonna keep using it. Okay, I can understand this viewpoint. But if you're saying this weapon is not bad, you don't know how to play it, that's BS. That's total BS. First of all, because some weapons, especially like to unlock their quote-unquote potential, you don't need to have tons of weapon points all of a sudden. You don't need to perform this insanely tough to pull off like cancels and so on and so forth. It's easier to just look at the surface level and see like what's good and what's bad about the weapon. And the damage numbers too play its huge role. Like, you take a look at we analyze skills like channeling skills like Rising Dragon Dance, Reaper, as well as Water Sword. You take a look at EI Quick Draw from Katana, that requires to move away your sword, like sheath your sword and then unsheath it by pressing R1 and circle. And you take a look at equivalent, Sign of the Cross. EI Quick Draw will never ever do as much damage as Sign of the Cross. Even if you're playing with Futsunushi Grace, the one that buffs 40% damage, I believe, to all the skills that does require of you to actually move your weapons away and then to pull it off to perform this attack. Sign of the Cross is still gonna be better damage-wise. Even though they function pretty much the same on the same thing. There is also like a follow-up when you have like Ultimate Sign of the Cross. It does even more damage to an AI Quick Draw. There you go. Like, you don't have to, if you're thinking about yourself, okay, well, maybe that's the problem, like I need to find like a better loot, a better gear. Those guys are saying that
pretty much view it as this, like,
it's like both positive and negative
in the following way. The situation is going to go as follows. Under the equal circumstances, one thing is going to be more powerful and more potent than the other. And no matter how much you're going to try to squeeze by using various various graces and stuff like that, it will still going to not to matter, because again, it's like the same skill, like several weapons will going to have same skill, you attach the same gear, you attach the same graces, the same stuff, and you blindly see that this is better, this is worse, this is even worse. Like, this is how it goes, and this is how it is here. Good thing or bad thing, well, considering the fact that I played with Sarigama, that received 0 changes from Nioh 1, it actually got worse when it comes to like nerfs and stuff. Like, I judge from my personal perspective, like, if I knew that there would be like a weapon that has the similar similar skills, and I knew that my weapon that I was using, Sarigama that is, didn't receive like anything and got even worse, I wouldn't have played with Kusarigama. I see no point. Like, I like the weapon, but I see no point of like butchering myself but with playing underperforming stuff just for what. And one important thing, that there is a cast in the Nioh community that likes this it likes using and licking this underperforming aspect. Like, nah, who needs to use powerful stuff? We're gonna use underperforming stuff so that we can style on enemies, so that the game is going to become more fun. No, it isn't fun, it's just you play it like, I don't know, you play it differently, you play it not how the game is supposed to be played, because generally speaking, one of the ways to play the game is to find the strength and build around that strength point, like the point that gives you most. Here, from what I understood, the different trend is being spread is that find the weak point and build around the weak point so that you're going to be weak, so that you're not going to be using what the game provides you with, those strong points. But that is fun. Like, I don't find it fun. It's not fun. It's dumb. And it's dumb that unless it's a challenge, why do you think that it's interesting? Like,
No. That's the example of them trying to justify their own viewpoint. The truth of the matter is that yes, I agree with you, most of the players in any kind of game where your character is progressing in one way, shape, or form, aka becoming stronger, would want to find, at least on their own first, second, third, fourth, fifth playthrough, would want to find a way to get stronger faster and with the least amount of time and effort put into it, to be able to farm up, to gear up their main character, their twins, in the fastest way possible. This way to justify that you need to be weak to appreciate combat system, the various flaws that it has, both with the positive and negative stuff. That's, in my opinion, that's BS. That's the opinion. That's the way to look at it from the elitist point of view, and who are trying to justify something that doesn't work because for them it's fun. To each their own, but to try to deliberately convince the others that it's actually how you're supposed to play, in my opinion, that's just dumb.
I wanted, before we were going to go into magic and ninjutsu, I would want to touch upon the aspect of the fact that in Nioh 2 there is a new element that was added, and it's basically semi-range playstyle using melee weapons. There are weapons that can be thrown in the enemies, such as dual hatchet and some projectile skills from, I believe, that sight, that new, also another new weapon.
Switchglaive.
Switchglaive. So there are two weapons, I believe two, because I don't remember if the staff can throw something in the enemies, but yeah, you can build or try to build something like a projectile-based gameplay using the dual hatchets. And dual hatchets, in my opinion, is the kind of weapon that only works decently if you go only with the range projectile based gameplay. I've seen how the range projectile gameplay plays. It's looking cringe. It abuses the fact that, much like in Nioh 1, you remember why they nerfed in Nioh 1 Hayabusa set, the infinite throwing of those shurikens, infinite kunais and stuff like that. You remember what happens with bosses, mostly humanoid bosses, when you start throwing non-stop something in them? They are stuck in the animation of blocking. Well, it goes without saying that the best way to use hatchets is actually to use ninjutsu and light armor and throwing stuff in your enemies. Throwing shurikens, throwing kunais, and at the same time throwing your access in the enemy, so the enemy cannot get to you. The point of the matter is, enemy cannot get to you. You ramp up like that's untouched ninjutsu, and you're basically a non-stop throwing ninjutsu tools and hatchets into the enemy. That's the only way how to play with the dual hatchets. That's because the dual hatchets were badly designed, and they're stuck with the fact that it's only range or bust, because melee attacks are bad, pretty much, with this weapon. Melee attacks are bad, and saying like, oh, you should combo melee with range. Why? If the range is going to be more potent and more viable and less risky, why would I risk myself into playing like melee plus range combat with that?
Yeah, like, I totally agree with you when it comes to, like, you should do, like, this or that. If you, like, no matter what type of weapon you are going to select through, when you're doing your own playthrough, if you find a way to abuse, if you find the best way to dish out the most amount of health and key damage in the least amount of time, and you don't have to resort to anything else, by no means use it to the point where you abuse it. That's what I can say. It's like when I was playing on the first difficulty with an axe, even though I had my problems, certain enemies were just, even though this weapon had problems, of which I already talked about, I abused the hell out of heavy attack and the high stance in general. Why? Because that's the shortest way to dish out the most health and key damage to the opponents. To all of them, bosses included. I don't see a point why I should continued my pressure by switching to mid stance or low stance, performing different and keep attacking them with other forms of attack if they are like 2 to 3 times worse. And it's not the matter, again, it's not the matter of fact, well, if you talked about, some of you might ask, well, you talked about how slow the recovery frames are in the high stance. Wouldn't it be better if you switched in the combat to mid stance and low stance and continue your pressure? That's true only to an extent. When it comes to slow weapons, it still doesn't stop enemies from utilizing any kind of gaps that they will find in your offense to their advantage, which makes it even worse when you're using slow weapon. So yeah, that's not gonna, that for me didn't change, it wouldn't have changed anything. So that's that. In my opinion, you shouldn't listen to those elitists who will say like, oh, you should use only this or that because this is how you supposedly have fun with the game, even though the practice shows you that it's not the easiest way to kill the enemies.
Yeah, and keep one also important, very important thing in mind when it comes to why it is important to kill enemies and bosses faster. Because, say for example, you are relying on proccing status effects on the enemies. If the fight is going to take you quite long, what ends up happening, each time you proc a status effect and then it goes away, the next time it is going to be harder, it will take more time to apply this status effect, to the point where you will not already going to be able to apply those anymore. This is going to ruin you because you will not going to receive those bonuses that you might have get from the debuffs or from the damage multipliers if the enemy is under some sort of a status effect. So deliberately, by making the fight longer, you are making your life more miserable. So leave that aspect of, oh, pick lamer weapons, use lamer skills, don't use this, don't use that. Keep those aspects to the elitist group
who those who play
are thinking that this is fun way. Do not think that you are going to lose something if you're going to be playing normally. What I'm saying normally. Just play normally the way you feel like you're squeezing out. You can squeeze out more if you're going to use this thing with that thing together. Like, do go for it. Because then you are going to be able to experience the game in less of a painful fashion. The game is, in some parts, already painful enough, so it doesn't, like, you don't have to make it even more painful for you. Like, you weren't going to prove anything to anyone by doing so, like, by falling for their traps of, like, saying, you've been using, well, this boss was easy for me. Oh, you've been using X. No wonder why he was so easy for you. Well, my whole build is around X. Oh, this enemy is resistant to water. Why are you using water against this enemy? Well, because my freaking entire build is focused around that. Or what, do I have to have like a set of spare, I don't know, build for each like weapon, like enemy and boss encounter?
No, that's impossible.
That's like impossible, and that's pointless. So it's always easy to blame someone for playing how he wants.
No, that's not how he wants it. Like, it's what's the point of trying to convince the others to play in the way how you would want them to play if they already found out the easiest solution to kill enemies faster, and that's pretty much it.
It's not just about convince, it's just the way how they do this.
Well, that's already the other topic. I don't want to delve too much about it in those fanboys who are trying to defend everything that's flawed in this game. Overall, I would say when it comes to general like combat mechanics, at least melee play style, my recommendation for you, for those of you who still want to try out, despite what I have said about the slow weapons, would still want to try them out, I'd say bring a secondary weapon with you. Bring some fast secondary weapon. Doesn't matter what type it will be. It could be like dual swords, fists, tonfas, even regular freaking katana. Why? Because at any given point, if you feel like you are struggling simply because you cannot keep up with an enemy because of how slow your attacks are, how slow your movements are, switch easily. There is like an easy built-in like system of not only switching from one thing to another, but also respecking entirely your tree, all your skill points, and so on and so forth. And again, on the higher difficulties, I talked about it, it's gonna be easier for you to grab those weapon points than on those first difficulties, so that you can experiment with more of them even further to the best of your attention, to the best of your ability. And when it comes to other stuff that we want to discuss, I guess I should also mention the aspect of some confusing parts that this game provides to you when it comes to skill description. I mean, the theory versus practice kind of thing, as well as skills that you are going to be acquiring from bosses. So when it comes to those confusing description of skills, I am going to speak from my own experience, and my brother is going to share his own experience. First skill that I want to mention is the ability to maneuver around. As the skill says, when your attack is being deflected, you can press triangle to maneuver behind an enemy, and then if you press triangle again, you will strike him down. That's useful because when you would dual swords, it has a passive that if you attack enemies from the back, you'll be doing extra amounts of damage to them. The skill shows it like this. There's a skeleton in the dojo, it deflects your incoming attack, then you are pressing triangle, the skeleton still looks in the center of the camera, your main character maneuvers behind him and strikes him down. Seems easy, like it's super reliable, especially against those enemies and humanoid bosses who likes to abuse block. Well, the practice is, the moment you try to replicate something like this, what would end up happening most likely is the fact that enemy is not going to just sit still and wait for you to dash stylishly around him and perform your attack. He's going to look after you, like in your direction, turn in your direction, and most likely you just hit him against the block one more time. Or he will move simultaneously with you while you are dashing, and when you press triangle again, everything that happens, you might simply trade blows. Additionally, if you're this moving ability when you're doing it, like when you're pressing triangle after your attack is being deflected, it's not making you vulnerable, meaning that you can get knocked out of this state, and you'll be completely ruined. Like this intent of maneuvering around strategically around the enemy will be completely ruined. So that's the first example of this like confusing skill description and how the practice contradicts something that is being displayed in theory. Again, it's already it's not necessarily say that this skill can be abused, because when you are maneuvering, like even if the skill works properly, chances are you'll only get an opportunity to land like 1 to 2 attacks, at least from my experience. It's not like a giant combo or any or full recharge skill. So I do not see a point why they either haven't increased the speed of your protagonist to make it worthwhile to actually circle around the enemy, or why they allowed those enemies like to keep up with you when you're doing this sort of stuff. So that's one confusing stuff that I want to talk about when it comes to combat system. It's not like good or bad. Let's say like sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So you are going to justify on your own whether it's like done with good intentions or with bad intentions. I'd say for me it's mostly confusing stuff. The other stuff that I want to mention when it comes to dual swords, that's the general skills, and then I'm going to move on to the skills from the bosses. The other confusing stuff is when you're using Rising Dragon. You see, certain enemies in this game has weird hitbox issue. Regular enemies and bosses included. What do I mean by that? Rising Dragon is the skill that propels your character upwards. You're doing multiple slashes, and then on the way up, and you're doing multiple slashes on the way down. The problem is that if an enemy have somewhat of a narrow or small, I don't know how to properly describe it, hitbox, what would end up happening is you'll be doing only some attacks. Some attacks will connect on the enemy, and some attacks will completely whiff against them. Another thing that could happen, even if the target is big, and I'd say big, like one-eyed Oni level of height, I'm attacking him, in 9 times out of 10, I'll simply propel straight through him. Why is that happening? I don't know. The skill shows that you're supposed to jump on one place, slightly angled towards the enemy, and then goes back around on the same spot when you're jumping. Yet the practice showed me that, especially against one-eyed Onis, I'm propelling right through them, and I'm hitting them only on the way up, but because I propelled through them, somehow it pushed me further away from them. I cannot land any hits on my way back, and it doesn't work to do any kind of a follow-up attack afterwards. And by the way, yes, I have forgot to mention that when you're going upwards, in order to perform a follow-up attack downwards, you need to press an attack button one more time. So yeah, that's when it comes to one of those strange things that I have personally encountered, where the skill description doesn't really matches the in-game experience. Now my brother is going to share his thoughts about his own skills, based ones that were confusing or somehow doesn't match something that he already experienced in game, and then I'm gonna talk about skills from bosses.
When it comes to skill descriptions, I didn't find that much of a problem with Kusarigama, like how it says what the skill does when it comes to that particular weapon, because I already said that since nothing was changed from the first game, no new skills, no new stuff has been added, it was pretty much already I had experience. I just had to refresh it in my memory. However, I still have some gripes that I have to share about why those skills work the way they work. And what I mean by that is, say for example, we take such stuff and I didn't understand this from Nioh 1 also. So in high stance, when you throw a hook into the enemy, if the enemy is a smaller creature, you grapple him towards you, right? You don't grapple him that much to you, that's one thing, but okay, that's one thing. But if you grab onto the big enemy, you're supposed to get yourself closer to him. Why in the holy mother of F, when couldn't they make it more reliable? Because when you hook towards the enemy that is bigger than you and you grapple, you propel yourself towards him, right? You basically, say for example, have a distance and you use that move. What ends up happening, no matter where you stand, you technically will going to stop, or you will going to land at the half of that distance. Always at the half of that distance. You will not going to get closer to him, and this move is slow, and when you grapple and you move a little bit closer to him, he isn't how to say, you don't stagger him, he isn't locked in place, so he technically can even retaliate you while you're doing so. So wouldn't it be more appropriate so that launch straight to him, preferably add something else like an upgrade that would allow you to like launch to him and behind him, like do a flip so that you would end up behind him or something like that. Or when you grab the enemy that is a small target or the target is like almost same size as you, there is also a problem. You don't grab him like completely to you. You grab him and he moves only a little bit further to you. Only a little bit, and there is pretty much no follow-up, which is like, yeah, I would say like, well, in Nioh 1 it could have been like this, but some work could have been done in Nioh 2. Work hasn't been done, and it's as bad as it was then, as bad as it is now. Like it's the same thing. It's a useless move. Another one of those useless moves, in my personal opinion, is like launching yourself into the air, like jumping into the air. The only reason why some people have been using it is the reason of the fact that there are certain like 360-degree attacks that you would want to dodge, and one of the ways that you would want to dodge them would be like jump into the air. But there is one problem. Sometimes your hitbox when you jump upwards remains on the ground. Sometimes it doesn't. So sometimes, even if you jump into the air, you're still going to be knocked from the air because your hitbox remained on the ground and you still received the hit, resulting in a knockdown state. Which is like, it's strange. It's also strange to me, like we haven't mentioned it yet, but I'm looking like kind of going further into what things have been added into the game. Are those not mastery skills, but weapon, basically those red skills that you have in the weapon skill tree, like those red passives.
Mystic Arts?
Mystic Arts, yeah.
They were present in the first game. It's not having
so when it comes to Mystic Arts, I personally I stand on the fact that it was way too lazy and way too dumb to add to Kusarigama like two Mystic Arts that are basically the same. One increased damage from the metal part, one increased damage from the blade part. Why it was lazy and lame is because of the fact that, well, basically almost everything that you do has damage from one thing and from another thing. Meaning you hit both from blade part and the metal part at the same particular like move, skill, or combo that you're doing. I would want to say that wouldn't it be nicer if actually one thing allowed you to like, if you open this Mystic Card, it increases your overall damage, and the other one, if you pick this Mystic Card, it increases the speed of how you perform certain moves. I'd say that would be way better and more versatile and more meaningful than having like damage, a little bit damage here and a little bit damage there. And no matter, like, in the end you still, because in the end you can possess two Mystic Cards, you will be able to have like both of them. And it's like, yay, I got damage. How unique, how unique. It's not, like, it's, the weapon itself is shitty and unmemorable already and hasn't received anything when it comes to, like, new stuff, except for the boss's skills. But you also get two generic Mystic Cards. A little bit more damage, a little bit more damage, yeah. Pick and choose. But this doesn't mean that those confusing parts, back to the confusing parts when it comes to how skill description works, it isn't only present in the weapon skill descriptions. It presents in the item skill descriptions. Such stuff like easy target, which means you are being more likely to being taunted by enemies.
Vice versa, you are taunting the enemies, not taunting.
Yeah, basically the enemies will going to more likely attack you. Why is it easy target? Why with all the confusion? Just say like taunt stuff and that's it. Why do we have like stuff? I don't know. Like say for example, you have extend, dodge, range, extend dash range, extend dodge invulnerability, and stuff like this. It's so much when it comes to like how they just name those, and they are confusing, and they don't supposed to be even that confusing.
Yeah, that's understandable, but those type of elements, I'd say we're going to be discussing in the later podcast when it comes to confusing elements, and in general, what could have been done better or totally excluded from the game, and the game wouldn't have become all of a sudden that much worse without them. But you said that like there was no confusing elements like in Kusarigama. How about the instances where you at one point could knock the enemies from their feet and at another point you could not do so? Like
this isn't only the Kusarigama problem. So here is how it is. You cannot...
Because, excuse me to interrupt, but the skill description doesn't say anything like when exactly you can knock the enemies.
Well, it doesn't say on basically every weapon that has sort of similar stuff. You can... what basically happens is that if your weapon has an ability to knock down an enemy, you cannot repeatedly do the same thing against that same enemy multiple times. So if you knocked him once, you have to wait for, I believe, 5 to 7 seconds till you will be able to knock him down again. Again, the game never explains this. Never. As if it's not even freaking important. Which, again, in a lot of cases, the game here will not go... like, we are continuing from where we have been bashing this game when it comes to story. You have to, like, think for the developers. So there is a mechanic such as you are not being able to consistently knock the enemy by using the weapon of yours, knock down the enemy, but we will not going to tell you about it. You will going to have to figure this on your own, and it might not be even the case, because say for example, this isn't the case in some instances when you knock the enemy by using your weapon skill, say for example Kusarigama, there is a foot sweep. But afterwards I can use Ippon Datara and knock the enemy down on the ground again. But how it works in one case, how it doesn't work in the other case, I don't know. Sometimes Ippon Datara doesn't knock the enemy onto the ground so that he can perform a finisher move. Sometimes when you use it, the enemy kind of roll backwards and that's it.
Yeah,
and he steps on his feet. Like, it is so confusing, and I don't understand how exactly does it work. And since the game doesn't want to tell me how it works, I don't want to dive into the fact like how it works. I understood that I cannot chain knockdowns. That's it. Like, that's all what I understood from this situation.
Yeah, but it could have been worse. It could have been treated with the description of it saying knocking down enemies, okay, and that's it. And you imagine like people reading this, okay, I can knock down enemies at any given time. They're using it and it doesn't work. They're using it again and it doesn't work. On the third time, okay, sometimes it works. So what's
and it's also confusing the fact that you see that this attack actually hits their feet, but they don't fall. It goes through them. It does a little bit of damage, but it doesn't knock them down.
Yeah, but and another problem is that attack has insane amounts of recovery. I'd say as much as when you attract the enemies from the distance.
Yeah, so the only way how you can do this attack properly with Kusarigama, hook the enemy, while, like, after hook there is this recovery for the enemy so that he is going to be standing still again. And while this recovery happens, you press the foot sweep, and only then it works. Because if you're going to be doing it otherwise, just a random foot sweep, good fucking luck. Foot sweep can be blocked, and it looks stupid. The enemy stands blocking upper portion of his body, foot sweep hits his foot, but it's still blocked, and you are going to get punished for that insanely hard.
Yeah, it's just like another thing when it comes to similarities of certain type of skills. This foot sweep skills that my brother had mentioned on Kusarigama is also present on other weapons, like on Spear, for instance. Sure, it doesn't cover as much distance. When I was fighting against a particular Revenant with a Spear on certain missions, he did it to me, but it's way faster when it comes to startup frames and safer too. So you're trading distance, I'd say like 2 meters of distance for the sake of it being more safer, and you can still play in neutral somewhat relatively fine when it comes to using a spear in general. Another thing that I want to talk about is that the Mystic Cars on Kusarigama, I'd say, well, from a person who have played with an axe, and I have seen, and also that I have analyzed other Mystic Cars in one of those episodes, I'd say Kusarigama, it's not as bad.
But it's generic.
When it comes to Mystic Cars.
I don't say it's entirely bad when it comes to like comparing to the others, but I'm just saying that it's generic. The way like, oh, increase damage. Well, I can do pretty much the same stuff for pretty much all of the weapons.
I agree.
Like, instead of doing something unique for everything, I get to have increased damage.
I just wanted to assure other players who might be thinking might be thinking about playing with Kusarigama that Kusarigama Mystic Cars is not bad by any way, shape, or form. No, that's fine for the job that it does. Of course, if you were to look at the others and analyze it from the perspective of like creative approach to the weapons, even take a look at Dual Swords that I'm using right now in this footage. Dual Swords Mystic Cars, what does it do? It synergizes well with the heavy armor, and when you're striking the enemy, it allows you, like you're performing those multiple strikes. Each strike you're doing, you are decreasing the ki usage, aka stamina usage for consecutive attacks, and you're also building up your defense, thus motivating you to play more aggressive with dual swords compared to other weapons. Again, you take a look at this, then yeah, you can say like from the creative standpoint that they did a better job compared to Kusarigama. But then you have abysmal cases of freaking Axe Mystic Cars and Hatchet Mystic Cars. One of which, when it comes to Axe, what it does is like, oh, when you are out of ki, you'll be doing more damage. Thus, it kinda provokes you to play with the zero ki build to dish out optimal amount of damage. But the problem is that this game is not really the greatest example of playing with zero ki builds, in my opinion, because every freaking thing on higher difficulties, well, almost everything when it comes to medium tier enemies to higher tier enemies and bosses, can easily just chop your head off, chop you in half if you are being too slow. So, and when it comes to zero ki builds in general, each spit, quote-unquote, is gonna transform you to a winded state, making it even less of a reliable instrument to be able to actually rely on this huge amount of damage. And what does the other Mystic Card do? Well, if you are in the Yokai realm, or when you are creating those pools and you are standing on them, receiving this debuff, you'll be doing extra amount of damage. And in my opinion, like how
gigantic problem to that standing in the yokai pool, especially
or being in the yokai realm.
Yeah, but the problem is if you stand in, well, what's the situation with the key region when it comes to playing with the next build and the heavy armor? And imagine like also standing constantly in the yokai pool or in the yokai realm. It will take you like, maximum going to do like 1 or 2 or maybe 3 hits, then 1 block and that's it. Like full stamina gun and you're done.
Not only that, but you are forced to play without a barrier in this way, because if you are in the yokai, you are going to dispel any pulls immediately if you have barrier on. But if you are in the yokai realm and you have a barrier on, you won't gonna be benefiting from Mystic Cars. So you are going to be playing without barrier, which means your ki recovery will be even more abysmal than before, considering how high consumption of ki this Axe weapon is already like demanding from a player. So to me, like, and if like you take a look at this, and yes, you take a look at Mystic Arsenal Costa Rica, and okay, I'm gonna be taking more damage than this because
well,
I can.
Because when there is something generic, there is something worse than generic.
Yeah, not to mention hatchets, Mystic Arts of Hatchets. All it does is allows you to do more damage when you're throwing hatchets, and it allows you to also throw hatchets at the greater distance than before. Wow, so
Two things that exactly complement to the fact that you if you're going to be playing with hatchets, just go full range build and that's it. Like,
yeah.
No point in this, like, comboing into range and melee. Why? There is no point.
Yeah, like just to use the most effective instruments that allows you to kill enemies faster and bosses. So what else? We talked about skills, magic and ninjutsu, and we're gonna be finishing with boss skills. Let's say in that order. Magic and ninjutsu. Well, I was using magic extensively, and yes. So another thing I guess we forgot to mention is that also the reason why we, as well as many other players, are using magic and ninjutsu still to this date in Nioh 2. Well, they did one thing which I didn't quite understood in Nioh 1 compared to Nioh 2. They nerfed the hell out of pure melee builds. What do I mean pure melee builds? Those builds that are stacking attack to an insane proportion in Nioh 2. In Nioh 1, excuse me.
You basically cannot stack, when it was like before, you could stack various sources of just pure physical attack, and then they just nerfed it
to the ground.
Yeah, because there was such cases where basically you could almost one-shot a boss in just one combo.
Yeah,
stuff like that.
That's understandable, but my problem is why you are completely... See, the thing is,
Instead of nerfing it, they remove it.
Yeah, when something being nerfed to the ground, no, it's not about removing or nerfing it. You can still somehow stack some amount of the attack in Nioh 2, but it's gonna be nowhere near as potent compared to Nioh 1. Why? Because, to put it simply, there is like some sort of like cap or hard cap or soft cap, and it's impossible for you to bypass it. Instead of nerfing it to the ground, in my opinion, they should have left the window of opportunity to build up viable numbers so that you can play through this game without the usage of that many buffs from magic and or ninjutsu. Because what ends up happening is, in the later stages of the game, in the first difficulty, okay, it's understandable you will not have as much of resources to be able to use various buffs, debuffs. You are kind of limited to what you can do, but the later, the more you play throughout this game, you will be unlocking many other options. You will be expanding your arsenal, so to speak. However, if you want to do any kind of good damage to a cursed enemy, cursed bosses, and so on and so forth, you are almost constantly forced to use those buffs or debuffs. Why? Because of the step down problem. Enemies, you are going to be the only chance for you to do great damage against their health pools is to activate Confusion. Activating Confusion allows you to do percent amount of their health damage, and it also nullifies their... this is one opportunity to nullify their buff that they have, you know, this green or red buff, the source that you currently see, for example, on your screen. But the thing is that if you were not, like, let's say, like, if you are a kind of player who want to, like, play pure melee, I can say you straight up front, like, and many others can say it too, it's impossible for you to do so. Again, the stat dump is too huge for the enemy.
No, it's possible if you want to kill bosses and wasting like 10 to 15 minutes.
Well, it's impossible if you want to kill enemies quickly. Let's just enemies and bosses quickly. Let's just say it like this.
Quickly is boring.
Yeah, but we're not gonna mention like this. Talk about the boring and or fun factor right now in the context of like discussing some blind fanboys who defend every kind of flaw that this game has. No, so because you're locked in this place, your builds, in terms of your, sure, there are plethora of variety when it comes to builds, but generally speaking, a lot, all of them will be are gonna be using magic and ninjutsu in some way, shape, or form, offensively and defensively, like spells, buffs, and debuffs. In my case, I used magic, mostly as a way to buff myself, not necessarily debuffing my enemies, at least when it comes to later playthroughs. On the first difficulty, I used weakness, no, I used slot actually, in the first half of the campaign. Then, when I realized that the game, realized, and also many other players have written, oh, it's like too easy, you need to remove slot, otherwise you were not going to be able to keep up with the later challenges, especially against certain enemies and bosses whose tempo is going to increase severely compared to the first difficulty. So I removed it. I started to use mostly buffs and debuffs, and it went perfectly fine. I mean, I applied confusion, I used like water elements, I played with element based builds. For you, there's plenty of opportunities to experiment with other stuff like fire-based build, lighting-based builds, corruption. Of course, the two archetypes, I can say it like this, that are competing for the #1 spot in terms of how much damage and how easy it is to do that damage to the enemies, are the corruption builds and purity builds. So if you want to be a part of the meta, so to speak, you can go with this. Each of them have their own like strengths and weaknesses, but I say for the job, for those tools that are provided to a player via magic and ninjutsu, they are actually quite nice in terms of boosting your character's strength.
I've been playing on my end with basically light armor, kusarigama, ninjutsu build with some from magic. Basically what I had been using was the Lightning Familiar Talisman and Barrier Talisman, for the obvious reasons. I would want to dispel pools, I would want to be able to have more ki, I would want to proc lightning status effect, because as I said before, two of the most powerful slowing down abilities that you can cast on your enemies is slot and lightning, which are tremendously helpful in the later difficulties of the game. I would say, like, I pretty much beaten the entire first difficulty and its DLCs without utilizing slot talisman, but I would say, like, it's only partially true about the fact that don't use slot talisman and so on and so forth, because you will be using that. Like, slot on magic hit and slot on ninjutsu hit are two of the most powerful ways to proc slot effect, especially if you're using familiar, any kind of familiar, but lightning familiar is more effective because of the lightning debuff effect. And I would say that an interesting way, well, not interesting way, but actually efficient way to play is to use not only the melee builds, but also utilize the support stuff for your melee stuff. So I've been using melee purity, but melee combat based purity, but I stuck in there new things such as feathers, like feathers from the ninjutsu tree. Feathers are freaking amazing. Feathers, and then later on I also added Hayabusa Fireball in there. And so lightning feathers and Hayabusa Fireball, and you go and blow the living hell out of most of your enemies. Some bosses are extremely vulnerable to lightning feathers because feathers are also multi-hit attack, and lightning feathers are also extremely good against targets who do not have ki, and also the fact that they kind of should I say this? They can devastate the enemy who is going to be out of key pretty quickly, because also you have the frame cancel animation. So basically you only have to like start the animation of casting the lightning feathers, and then you burst counter, and then you can push another one of these feathers and then do the same thing. So basically you can chain up until he gets up. You can chain like 4 or 5 spells while he is going to be just recovering from having no key. This is extremely important, but because it's also a good way to experiment what is good and what is not when it comes to those additional skill trees for magic and ninjutsu. But unfortunately, experimenting with those will going to quickly result in the fact that you will going to quickly understand that in the skill tree of magic and ninjutsu, only like 10 to 15% of available stuff that you can acquire is actually useful. The other stuff is either niche or for shits and giggles, or straight up lame. Like it won't going to do you much. Like explosive arrows, levitation scrolls, all that kind of nonsense, like cat walking scrolls and stuff like that. Yeah, like some niche and some really bad stuff in there. But my point here is if you want to have an easier time, do try to utilize at least like one of those, like either magic or ninjutsu, or you can use both at the same time as you're using whatever the hell you're using, because let's be honest, buffs and debuffs are what going to carry you onwards in those boss fights, in fights against tough opponents, or maybe some fight, some enemy gives you a lot of problem and you want to defeat him more quickly. Say, for example, Giant Crab. What, you're going to go and keep on attacking him while he is always going to be constantly rotating, protecting his weak spot? No, what you can end up doing is like throwing him some lightning spells or lightning scrolls, and you're going to kill him in no time. That's a time saver, and that's actually an easy way to defeat an annoying enemy.
Yeah, another cool thing here is, like with any kind of melee stuff, you can easily respec entirety of your tree by purchasing the book from a merchant, and you, like my brother said, you are free to experiment with whatever spells you like, whatever feathers you prefer. If you're ninjutsu oriented build, if you like more omnio magic stuff, you can go with it. And another thing we also forgot to mention is the fact that you, if like let's say you do not enjoy melee combat for whatever reason, even when you have tried all the weapons in this game, you enjoy firing off spells, you can go with spells.
Yep.
Believe it or not, yes, at the beginning it's gonna be probably harder because you won't have as much of a resources. Maybe I won't say it for sure, but maybe
you're not going to have as much percent of untouched magic or untouched ninjutsu.
Yeah, but then again, you can spam enemies with kunais and bombs. So who knows? Like, I haven't tested it myself, but from what I have heard and seen myself personally, especially in the end game, casters, especially those who have more experience than we do, pure casters, doesn't matter, ninjutsu or omnio magic ones, they are destroying enemies and bosses way faster than any other builds, than legit any other builds that are utilizing melee attacks, period.
Not only bosses. So I've seen a person was playing with a pure ninjutsu build, with the graces for ninjutsu, with the set for empowering ninjutsu and giving more untouched ninjutsu. So basically what ends up happening, you don't even need to fight them in melee. You see the enemies, like a pack of enemies. Hayabusa Fireball, one-shot this guy, throw one or two feathers, one-shot those guys, and while you're doing so, while you're basically decimating all of those enemies with spells, you don't run out of resources, because at certain percent of untouched ninjutsu or untouched magic, every time you cast a spell, it doesn't consume the spell charge.
No, you will consume your resources, but it's not gonna be as fast as if you were to use those offensive or defensive spells regularly without the untouched Omnio Magic parameter, which with certain percent allows you to use it for free, basically. The thing is, like, why you might ask, like, why is it happening and why are you guys haven't talked about that before? Well, mechanically, it happens why casters have way easier time to decimate pretty much any other foe compared to a player who focuses on melee, even with buffs. That's pretty simple, because spells, at least when we're talking about like tier 2 and tier 3 spells, they are multi-hitting attacks, sort of like a shotgun effect. It creates like a shotgun effect. It's like 10 to 15 attacks with a span of like 1 to 2 seconds at the worst possible scenario. And those bosses are gonna eat it all. Like, there's no way for them to like block the entirety of their attacks. Like, as far as I'm aware, they cannot block those cast of spells. Some attacks most likely are going to hit them. That's number one. Number two, you'll be more, as long as you are playing right when it comes to positioning and so on and so forth, you'll be way safer. You won't have to deal with all the all the nonsense that melee combat has in this game, like absence of hit advantage, strangeness of hyper armor activation that we have talked about it. Because, to put it simply, all you're doing, you're bombarding enemies from afar.
Yeah, and in some instances, much like with Dark Souls, if you played Mage in Dark Souls, you probably have seen this. In a lot of cases, bosses, if you have sort of a huge distance between you and them, they will going to start behave strangely. They will either going to slowly, very slowly walk to you, eat damage, and like this happens here as well. So basically, you can kind of abuse the system of the fact that if you're standing far from them, they don't do pretty much anything to you.
Like in my opinion, that's the positive way to look at it. The more option you have, of course, all the options have their certain amount of strange things or BS that we have mentioned, but at least compared to story, where it's all always was negative, the combat system, especially with the inclusion of ninjutsu and magic, because it gives you options that you can rely on safely and relatively well, and at the same time complete in-game content, it makes it worthwhile to invest your time, to experiment with certain stuff, to see what works best for you, to not be a prisoner of only one playstyle, again, because of the free and easy respect at any given time. Like I'd say, the only problem, it's not necessarily a problem, the only way where I will say to you where you should not respect, at least when it comes to combat wise in general, is if you have already collected your set. I mean, the entirety of your grace. That happens mostly on Dream of the Nioh for the majority of cases, so it's like on the final difficulty.
Yeah, the respecting in the very, very end, when you already have gathered races and stuff like that, I wouldn't say that it is a really good idea, because of the fact that, well, unless you already have already farmed up another set for the different build, then respect. But if you didn't, don't, because it's very tedious to farm in this game and to like farm necessary items.
Yep, it takes a very long time to do, and it's not, in the end, it's actually, it's going to be more negative than positive. Like, you'll, unless you're using some form of other methods that we're not going to be talking overtly here about them, it's pretty hard to gather to farm up all of the new sets and switch like from one build to another on Dream of the Nioh. Up until that point, you can do whatever you like. You can respec as much as you want. Now, I would also want to talk about another thing that we haven't mentioned, and that is like confusing expectations. Yeah, I can say it like this: confusing expectation and misunderstanding of the combat in general. What do I mean by that? When you are playing through this game, especially in melee, at least when it comes to melee combat, there are some missions in Dojo where you are going to be fighting certain trainers, whether it be like Surigama trainers, an axe, a trainer who uses like an axe, a trainer who uses dual swords, and so on and so forth. And typically, when this mission gives you as a reward a skill point that you can use in order to boost up further certain active or passive abilities in your desired weapon. But this misunderstanding that might happen to you, especially when you're playing through the game for the first time, or maybe it's already like your second difficulty and so on and so forth, you might be thinking that at any given point, especially at the end game, like at the end game, once I will complete or collect my entire build, I will be as powerful, or I'll be fight on the same level as those dojo mission bosses, meaning that I will have the same level of speed, finesse, hyper armor, if we're talking about those bosses who are utilizing heavy armor on them. I will have the opportunity to cancel my moves, like, or outright spam them as much as I want, and so on and so forth. It creates this false sense of impression that maybe you would want to strive, like maybe I will be like, and it also might contradict those previous points that we have talked about, like what those guys are talking about. If I was fighting this dojo mission boss, and he's like faster, way faster than those guys are showing us on the playthrough. He is using various different skills, movesets. He relies solely on how skillfully he maneuvers around the battlefield, and so on and so forth.
Bosses are something that your main character is never going to become.
Yeah, exactly.
Even if you're going to be wearing the same set of armor, the same weapon, and stuff like that, you still will not going to be able to do most of the things that you do, even if you are going to obtain their boss skills. Even
not only about boss skills. I mean, I have seen instances where if we talk, I mentioned heavy armor users like Master Swordsman set, Dojo Master, or the one who uses an axe, also Dojo Master. What about Ren? So I have seen some streamers who are using light armor, and they were using light armor set from Ren Hayabusa. They, like, to put it in the perspective, it's not one of the same things. So
yeah,
bosses,
there is no skill like jumping, like he does the jump attack on you. Like, yes, you get his grab attack that he uses when, like, you can use that grab attack only when the enemy is out of key, as a sort of like change the finisher move that you had to this finisher move. But he can do it like from, even if you have like full stamina, he can use this on you. So like, it just goes to show that you're never going to be able to have the same prio as they do, the same moves as they do. Well, yeah, you can have the same moves as they do, but they will not going to be as powerful as they are, like never going to be, something like that.
Yeah, so what we are trying to
don't fall for the false expectations.
Yeah, those are definitely false expectations. Do not believe or think for yourself for any second that at any given time you will be on the same level, or as close as being on the same level as those bosses in dojo missions. No, that this is never gonna happen. Maybe if this game would have been like Devil May Cry style of game, then yeah, maybe, like, but it's still like a far stretch in my opinion. Now, one last thing that I want to discuss for today when it comes to combat in general is skills from bosses. Now, if you don't know about this, skills from bosses are very rare to actually get from them. When you defeat them, there is a certain chance, and you need to defeat them in missions. there's a certain chance for them to drop their skills. However, in my opinion, in my experience, those skills that I have acquired on dual swords, such as low attack, low channeling attack, attack from low stance when you need to channel it from the Kichiro, as well as two of the attacks from two DLC bosses, Minamoto no Yoshitsune, called Sacred Bird Fly, and Minamoto no Yorimitsu, Sacred Bird Cry and Flight. They were not worth my time and effort when I actually got them. This is something, I don't know if other skills. I forgot. Like another skill was worth it. It's called like not only Punish the Proud. It's in some sort of a unique berry that you get from the bosses, from a boss who have problem with his teeth. You remember this, the one who has the elephant as his spirit, and he shoots lightning. And there is also Ultimate Sign of the Cross, when it's like a double follow-up attack. So certain skills from bosses doesn't... what I'm trying to tell you guys is certain skills from bosses they do not worth your time and effort to grind them in order to get them. How can you tell like whether the skill is gonna be worth it or not? Simple. You look at the footages specific from those people who are showing the application of the skill in real combat against real enemies, preferably when it happens in depths or the underworld, not the ones that are showing you this nonsense in dojo mission when they are kicking and flipping and vaulting over gakis and doing boss kills against them, or this first yokai, believe it's called like, don't remember, the yokai with an axe. No, you need to find the footage of a player or a streamer, either on YouTube or Twitch, who uses this, who applies this boss's skills effectively in combat, to see how well the damage is, how much of an utility a skill provides, and whether or not it's worth it to grind it. Because if you were to look at it from the perspective of those who only shows footages at dojo mission, you might be thinking, well, all bosses' skills are top-notch, I'm gonna go like farm all of them and it's gonna be like totally worth it. No, it's not. I can tell you from my personal experience, skills like Sacred Bird Fly, like when you are doing this triple dash and at the end you're slashing at the enemy, and Sacred Bird Cry, when you're doing these attacks, it looks like a Magatsu warrior is doing his distance attacks from a spell, but you're using your Hayamaru sword, your light sword. It's like 4 or 5 attacks consecutive in a row. Or it can be one attack if you not hold those buttons, if you just press it once. They are not worth it, not from the damage standpoint, not from the utility standpoint. For instance, when I'm doing Sacred Bird Flight, I could be intercepted at any given point in time while doing those charges. Also, you have to keep in mind those boss kills, they're using anima meter. So it's another resource that you have to keep track of alongside with your burst counter and soul core abilities. Next thing, when it comes to, for instance, if you can compare Ippon Datara, when you were jumping on Ippon Datara, I talked about it, nothing can just knock you away when you are already in the air when Ippon Datara blow. It's impossible. There you have your frames of invulnerability per se. And compare this to Sacred Bird Fly when, yes, the distance that it covers might be greater, of course, nobody is gonna argue over that. But what's the point if every sneeze, every speed can knock you over from this animation? Like, what's the point of even doing so? Oh yeah, and the damage from the slash that that I am doing at the very end of the Sacred Bird Fly, it's not even worth it. It's like barely even hitting the 5k numbers, so that's trash. Next, Sacred Bird Cry, this 5 consecutive attacks. All in all, it does, I'd say, like 10 to an opponent who doesn't have as much of a protection, does somewhere between like 8k to 10k damage, so it's decent. But again, the problem is when you're standing and charging, you can get interrupted. And nobody's gonna, if you didn't know, if you are getting interrupted at any given point in time, you will not gonna get your resources back, because why would you? Like, you already wasted them, right? It's not like ki that regenerates automatically. So, on top of that, when you are performing this chain of attacks, if enemy is moving slightly away, this is not gonna auto-target him or auto-correct your target so that you will land all your hits. Again, that makes it in my opinion, somewhat of a worthless skill to use when it comes to those boss abilities that you are grinding for the countless amounts of hours sometimes. On the contrary, like I've told you before, skills like Ultimate Sign of the Cross, basically the difference between the regular version and Ultimate is the fact that you're doing 2 extra slashes at the end of your fully charged Sign of the Cross. Yeah, that's totally worth it. Yes, it does great damage. Yes, you can cancel in it from any given time and at any given point. Yes, it was worth it. Likewise, the parry, if you're fighting if you're fighting humanoid opponents, the Spanish the Proud, that does good key damage, and you can also combo it together with God of the Wind 3. So yeah, like that's my take on the skills when it comes to skills from bosses.
My take is going to be way shorter, simply because of the fact that more than 200. I was about to say more than 200 years, more than 200 hours into the game. Believe it or not, I haven't got myself any Kusarigama boss skills. Yeah, I was that lucky to not actually get any skill, but at the same time, I would say that I don't really care that I didn't got any of those skills. Some of those skills, as I've seen, are reliant to you have to parry or timely guard. I am playing with light armor. I'm not parrying and I'm not timely guarding. I hate parrying in Souls games, I hate parrying in Nioh 1 and Nioh 2. I am not into that, so that skill is not going to be interesting to me. There was a skill that is like performing another type of a finisher move, but then, as a matter of fact, like, why, like, I don't personally think that I needed that, especially like wasting anima meter, which I spend mostly on such stuff as far as I remember, like Ippon Datara, I spent it on later on, started spending on the Owl skill to get my stacks for the Izanagi Grace, and there was one more, which I already forgot what it was, but basically I am always finding something on which I need to spend anima meter on, and my most powerful skills and abilities that I'm pretty much using are just Light Attack from Heavy Stance, Renegade Dragon, Reaper, Blade Spin, Grappling Hook from Mid Stance, which does a spin after you grapple towards the enemy, which does damage to them also. And that's pretty much Foot Sweep, yes, and that's pretty much it. I didn't found any rhyme or reason to go and farm for that Japanese Aquaman. I didn't like him as a boss. I didn't want to farm him, but in those instances where I have fought against him, he never dropped me anything. I was not depressed by it, I actually did not care about it, and I actually... Like, I don't think that I wasted something because I didn't get those skills. I literally don't think that I did. To me personally, like, well, I didn't get them, so what? So I won't going to have to parry to see that skill? Well, okay, I'm not going to have to parry, which is good. I'd rather have dodges and stuff like that than parry, like... So, yeah, for some weapons... Maybe boss skills are good, maybe they are not. Like, I cannot personally say stuff like that, but from my personal experience, to me not getting them was practically like... I didn't lose anything, I didn't gain anything. So, well, I gained anything. I gained time that I didn't have to waste to farm those bosses for skills that might end up being bad. And from what I've seen, pretty much those who are doing builds, none of them were actually using boss skills. Like, none of them. Well, so it just goes to show that, well, why do you need them?
Well, the thing is, it's not... maybe on the surface level, again, the intention of the overall inclusion of the boss skills in your arsenal if you're pressuring enemies is a nice idea on paper, but it's hard to realize. That's number one. And number two, unlike general skills on weapons that you can experiment with at any given point in time, if you have enough points, you know, you can easily respec and see for yourself if they're worth a shot, if they're worth to include in your gameplay. Boss skills, again, unless you check videos of people and are watching streams of people using those boss skills in legit combat, I highly emphasize here on the fact that do not trust those videos that shows you how powerful skills are.
I have something to add here about those. Like, I've already mentioned at the start of the video today that in Nioh 2 there are basically target dummies enemies and type of enemies, and there are enemies who are going to tear you a new one for like whenever they please. So most of the time when you look at those flashy combo videos or some kind of showcase, it's going to be done in that dojo mission or against those enemies who are so easily staggerable, who are not going to retaliate, who are not going to do anything against you. Of fucking course it is easy to show it there, but go and show it against Lightning Gods of Yomi, for example. Go and show it against Kashin Koji, Minamoto, against, I don't know, even Takimaru with his, when he has this form with dual daggers. Go and show there. Don't show me like how this is done on a zombie, how this is done on a monkey, a regular monkey, not even mage monkey. Like, it looks like fashionable. It's so good. Like, here I do this move and then I follow in this move. No, for Kusarigama it all looks like shit. I've seen the combo video, it looks like shit, and I see gaps that are so huge that every single boss is going to counter them. But for other weapons it's like, yeah, man, it looks so good. How does it perform in the real fight? Oh, I do this, and then he one-shots me. Or I do this, and he punishes me in the middle of combo, or in the middle of skill, or he interrupts my skill. But that was not on the video. But why? Like, why?
It's the same thing I could say to you, like, don't, like, there's a saying, don't judge the book by its cover. Well, in Nioh 2, a lot of the skills, you shouldn't judge them by their description, by the cinematic short one that they place, showcasing how the skill performs in dojo mission. Again, you stay away from those videos that showcasing, if you want to analyze appropriately the correct application and the correct strength of the skill, stay away from such highlights that showcases dojo missions, because they are not the right, in our opinion, they are not the right way to showcase how well the skill works.
They don't show the real situation.
Yeah, sure, like the real combat. Like it's like when I first had a look at the skill like Sacred Bird Flight and Sacred Bird Cry. I mean, I was thinking to myself, oh wow, like triple dash sounds like so powerful. Wow, I'm gonna use it like instead of Ip. I legit thought I'm gonna be using it way more instead of Ip on Datra, because you could cancel those dashes at any given time. You can have 1, you can have 2, you can have 3, and you can cover great distance. And then I was doing it against an enemy. If I remember correctly, it was against Magatsu Warrior. I did 1 dash. In the midst of this 1 dash, he attacked me with his whirling spin. He that straight intercepted me during this. So there isn't even any frames of invulnerability. There isn't even any point of using this against a quicker enemy. If you're gonna use it against something slow, well then slow enemy can easily be kited and get rid of without any of this cool looking stuff, you know what I mean? You don't need to have like this fancy shenanigan if you want to dispatch of something again, I don't know, like against a giant crab or
what I see most of those boss skills are just like, again, creating this picture of having a lot of stuff.
Yeah, it's true. It's a lot of stuff, but the practical application it's different.
In the end, here's like a thing, and on the other side we have its usefulness. So its usefulness is being heavily negated by the fact that you basically can't use it in most of those vital situations in which you find yourself pretty much all the time on later difficulties, then why is it, like, why should you even bother? Or more, should I say, why is it in the game in this fashion? Because they didn't, like, I'm pretty sure they didn't even rebalance them to be more viable as the time goes by, because obviously, who needs that? They just slapped it in. See how our giant skill tree looks like. Like this,
It's
this
not
whole
even a giant skill tree.
this whole like variety. Only you quickly realize that again, out of it, 10% is your max. What you're going to squeeze out when it comes to usefulness.
It's not only usefulness. It's the
Reliability.
Yes, and usefulness and reliability. You're correct if we're talking about melee system, but if we're talking about magic or ninjutsu, it's the capacity.
Yeah,
overall.
the capacity is shit.
The capacity will not allow you to include like 80, 70, 60% of the tree in your arsenal. Granted, it's not needed, but it may create a false impression of it being way too grandeur in terms of variety and scale. I mean, we have like insane value here, like tons of active, passives, channeling, whatever.
Say, for example, 3 fireballs of Hayabusa, which is kinda the boss skill from Ren Hayabusa, the fireballs, one of several that you can get, are, when it comes to cost, they are... The 3 fireballs are for a cost of 6, no, not 6, actually 12 feathers, of the 12 tier 1 feathers. 12. So it means like I can have like 6 lightning feathers, then 3 fireballs, or I can have like 6 lightning feathers, 6 fire feathers, 6 water feathers. So yes, the fact that you have to make those
decisions,
vital decisions of what do you want, and then I don't understand why even people go to so far as to squeeze in those, like, create explosive arrows when stuff literally dies when you carry a rifle or a cannon around you.
And because it looks cool, maybe only for that reason.
Bow is pretty much starting to become garbage after, like, difficulty in, like, New Game 2+. The bow starts to become garbage. On final difficulty and in the depths and stuff like that, you will not going to be shooting with the bow. Like, why? You will not even going to one-shot a skeleton with it, so why even bother?
Again, like, my main gripe about boss skills outside of compared to everything else is you do not have an opportunity to quickly evaluate its usefulness, and at the same time, like, change it if
and they are not even
like
they are not even situational. You cannot even call them situational because of the fact that they aren't situational. If one boss is going to be able to intercept that attack, the other boss is also going to intercept that attack.
Oh, you mean situational in terms of how often do they interrupt?
Well, maybe it works better against this boss, but against this boss it doesn't work that good. But no, against this boss it will going to get interrupted, and against this one it will, but against Gaki it will not.
Nah, I have the same problem. Usefulness, see, I don't think the amount of interruption is the correct way to describe it, because it's like, then you are gonna justify that, okay, the skill, maybe it's worth it, but then it's situational. So I didn't waste my time of grinding it for like 20 hours, so I'll use it a couple of times to justify that I still have it, you know, like in the case of Sacred Birthlight and Cry. Well, in my opinion, again, I talked about it at the very beginning, many other people, majority of the people, are seeking the easiest solution to dish out the most amount of damage with the least amount of effort. If you want, like, certain specific, under certain circumstances that you can activate, like put X plus Y plus Z and sometimes it may equal this, and this is gonna justify the usage of this boss skill, I don't think it's worthwhile in the end. Maybe certain people do, the ones who grinded out all the value of the easiest stuff. You know, they already tired of seeing like feathers one-shotting everything, magic one-shotting everything. But then again, those people played through this in this game already for thousands of hours. Then yeah, maybe I can understand this viewpoint. But your average player, tell this to the average player that you need to, first of all, grind a skill that drops randomly, and the chance of it being dropped is so low. It's sometimes not even worth to grind to begin with. And then when he finally gets his hand on the skill, he's so excited. He's gonna, okay, now it's finally time for me to use it. Let's go in battle. I have seen plenty of videos when people use the dojo missions, and it does shitty damage. Even though it's like, in my opinion, when I forgot to talk about this skill, this whirlwind from the low stance, where I've got it from the corrupted teacher, I believe. So when I was doing this skill, it does no damage. More often than, and also it doesn't allow you to cancel safely from any move that you have in low stance or mid stance. I believe it's only low stance only. Like you have to press L1, hold L1 and press circle. And when the spinning is happening, the only way for you to cancel out of it is doing burst counters or soul core abilities and or shifting. But again, why in the living I wanna use this skill over the stuff that I already have in low stance, like God of the Wind or the ability to hover over and attack enemies from the back. And some players will say, well, you need to combine this with Whirlwind in high stance. Okay, let's talk about Whirlwind in the high stance. That's the base skill. Whirlwind in high stance, how much damage it does? It did 3000 damage per hit, per each individual hit. I believe there's like 3 or 4 hits overall. Compared to my water sword, it does way more damage, it does way less, damage than a water sword. What's the reason for me using it there? And again, you have to, instead of, it also contradicts with the water sword, because it also, you have to press L1, hold L1, and then press triangle.
Well, it's, again, following like on the usefulness of certain skills against uselessness of the other skills. Well, for quite a long period of time, I was like thinking about what's going to be the most like efficient strategy for me to kill, pretty much to grind through those various enemies, purple ones, red ones, etc, etc, etc. I've been trying to mix and match like various things on them. Say for example, like this enemy on your screen. In my case, how do I fight this enemy? So I get to it, I put a lightning familiar talisman on me, I run to the enemy. If the enemy is, for example, like she's not sitting, she's busy like hammering something into the wall or stuff like this, I'm running into her. The most effective strategy, that is, run into her and start attacking her with Reaper. And I just kill her with the Reaper, like she can't do anything about that. I don't need boss skills, I don't need to do any sort of combos, I don't need any of that. I could do that, it would take me 4 to 5 times more time and also putting myself into danger. Why, when I can simply find an easier solution to just get in there and kill her? I had, again, struggles with Atakimaru that I had. I legit, it was one of the bosses that was very tough for me to defeat. Not one from the last DLC, he's shit, but those previous forms. I had problems with him. Turns out, the Reaper was the solution all along, so I had to like circle around him, dodge a little bit, and then Reaper him. And then Reaper him again and again. I didn't need to do like pretty much like anything. I didn't need combos, I didn't need to waste my time on like trying to find all those solutions, just because those solutions are in the end worse than what you already have. And here's like the same example, like Whirlwind that he mentioned in light stance is bad, Whirlwind in high stance is bad, but who needs that when you have like Water Sword and that Rising Dragon, which are doing 10 times better than those skills. Yeah, like, does he really need to spend his time just to like try to make them optimal when they even in the optimal state will be underperforming than optimal stuff, like than base stuff.
No, unless I'm deliberately seeking to undermine the strength of my character.
So
I don't think it's worth it.
That's the point. Like,
another aspect is for the better understanding of the context. It's not like my gear was shit. My gear had everything connected to active skill damage, active skill key damage, more damage, more attack power, and so on and so forth. Even with that, I can blatantly see that some skills are way better than others. Some skills are garbage. Doesn't matter if it's a boss skill. Doesn't matter if it's.
Speaking of, now that you've actually mentioned it, speaking of confusing stuff, I remember now. I still do not understand. How is it legit possible that with my build on Purity that is based on multiplying damage from melee attacks, do I actually do 2 to 3 times more damage using skills, despite the fact that stats on my gear and my multipliers bluntly say in my face that it increases melee damage. Not the skill damage. But at the same time, my attacks from skills, attacks from Reaper, Renegade Dragon, are far more powerful than attack from the high stance light attack combo. Like, it's confusing. I didn't understand, but in the end, I started to just abuse Reaper more and more because it's so fucking powerful. Why not?
Yeah, like, pretty much exactly the same thing. Like I've told you before, no, doesn't matter. We're gonna be concluding this already in a short while, and my closing words for this is, unlike the story, combat in Nioh 2, taking into account melee perspective of it, ninjutsu and magic, allows you to have room for maneuver, and it's a good thing. It's an overwhelmingly positive thing where you are not a prisoner of something that you need to.
Not a prisoner of living weapon anymore.
Yeah, and not only living weapon, but you have plethora of choices, and some choices are blatantly better than the others. You have flexibility, you have freedom, you can respec at any given point in time, you can experiment with a lot of weapons, a lot of play styles, heavy armor, light armor, medium armor, and so on and so forth. It's just smaller negatives like upset the overall impression from it being great. It has, in our standpoint, this combat has the potential of being actually, if not the best, then one of the best combats in the compared to other games that we have played. The stuff that sets it back, however, is strange decisions, confusing stuff that could be resolved easily. I mean, what stops developers from realizing proper hit advantage? I don't know. What stops developers from realizing the visual and audio cue together for players to clearly understand the presence or absence of hyper armor? I don't know. Again, like it's already done in other. Here's what pisses me off. It was done in other games, fighting games and other games too. But Nioh 2 wants to have its own unique style, and this maybe prevents it from being present. Why? I don't know.
I mean, from my standpoint, and again, I'm going to repeat something that I said before. It's hard to go back to Nioh 1 after you play Nioh 2, which means a step in the proper directions was made. However, this is something that was also said many times. For each step in the right direction, for each good thing, you get 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe more things that are questionable, strange.
More blatantly bad.
Why? Like, it is so confusing to the point where it doesn't even have to be. Like, you went into the right direction. Why the fuck did you stop there and went into the wrong direction? Like, it's going to be present in this game a lot, but go in the right direction. Just push it this way. Nah, I'm just gonna go this way, I'm just gonna go that way, I'm just gonna go backwards, I'm just gonna go this and
push
that.
it properly by developing those ideas and multiplying those ideas that work good. For instance, in my opinion, burst counters and soul cores are things that should be present in any kind of future installments in Nioh 3, the possible future of the Nioh series in general. But things that not work, that were absent, like absence of proper hit advantage and the crap implementation of hyper armor, and yes, I do believe that it's a crap implementation, both in the player-based sense and in the enemies-based sense, work better in this direction. Make it clearly and by audio and visual cue when it works, when it stops working. Also, tune in weapons so that they are gonna be so that they will have more of a balanced effect between each other with some unique play styles. I don't say, of course, for the sake of argument, yes, in many other games that include various weapon choices, you clearly have some outstanding ones and some other performing ones. That's non-negotiable. But we have expressed and talked about multiple examples where it's not a matter of one being underperforming than the other. It's a matter of one being clearly better than everything else. And in my opinion, that's the problem. When you create something that's being clearly more powerful than everything else, chances are more people are starts to using it. Like, because of how good they are. Like, look me in the eye, or if you have played this game by yourself, and say to me, why in the love of God people would want to use hatchets? Like, there is little group next to no people at all who are using hatchets in this game, because they are objectively worse weapon than compared to anything else. You can see it by the amount of people using them online, offline, whatever the case might be, but even by the Revenant Graves. They are, again, objectively the worst weapon in the entire game. It's not about being viable, reliable, like we talked about with the slow yet on paper powerful, like two-handed weapons. No, objectively they're trash. So why would you want to use those weapons if you have other choices? Again, that's the positive combined with negative.
Yep, and the point here is, again, going back into like the situational. It's not even about the situational weapons. If you take, for example, fists. Fists work extremely well against everything and anything. So it's not about situational stuff. But say for example, like hatchets, do they work well against like everything that you can encounter? I doubt so. Say for example, will Kusarigama work just as efficient in various circumstances as, say, for example, dual swords or split staff? No, it will not. So it's not a thing about whether one thing in these circumstances against those bosses, against those enemies, this weapon is bluntly more powerful. No. And again, coming back to the fact that X does very high damage to ki and HP, but so does fists, but they are
X to ki, only to ki.
But they're also like very allows you to maneuver a lot. They allow you to cancel from a lot of stuff. They don't consume a lot of ki. Also, the fact that with fists you can block even more than you can with an X, because of the fact that it's just how this weapon works. So you get more blocking, it's more defensive, but also more offensive oriented and more versatile weapon compared to the X. So it goes like this. Like, there is no thing that you can say like, well, if in this, then in this. Nah, it's, I put them into the same like situation, and you tell me that like pick whatever weapons and just compare them in that one same situation.
Yeah, like we did with the Rising Dragon, no, not Rising, Water Sword versus Reaper versus Dragon Dance.
Yep, exactly.
So you clearly see like who's the winner out there. There's no like, there's a factual information, there's no denying this. You can say subjectively, I prefer this because I like this moveset, but objectively, this does 10 times, well, theoretically speaking, 10 times more damage and allows you to be more maneuverable than the other.
And again, it's not about the fact that, whoa, you guys think that everything should be balanced.
No.
Not exactly.
No.
Specifically because there is no such thing as everything is balanced, and we don't that, and we don't want that exactly like balance. We just want to emphasize on the thing that we got tired of the fact that there is this like everything is viable. It's not that this skill is blatantly worse than this skill. It's still viable.
No, just when you say something is like everything is viable, you de facto is going to justify that something is blatantly like trash.
Killing
has a
enemies with punching them without weapons can be also considered by some viable.
Yep.
But it will not going to make so that's like.
It will not going
there are no legit like builds for like using no weapon and fighting enemies like bare bones just with your knuckles. Like it's not going to happen. But you can say that it is viable also. Will it change something? No.
Like, I'm gonna conclude this on this note. We forgot to mention a lot of the things when it comes to combat, but it's like a major topic, and I do not believe it's worth like a second episode. We talked about majority of the stuff that we want to express, but to say that everything is viable, excuse me, I'm going to mention this. There is, when you execute an enemy with your weapon, there is when he is laying on the ground, there is different animation and speed with which you're executing this enemy. You might say, well, why is that important? Well, my friends, this is important because certain enemies can have quick rise get up and they can punish you when you're too slow on your executing. And unlike other moves, you cannot cancel out of your execution animation with burst counter or with the usage of shifting form or soul core ability. I've had instances where I was executing enemies with X and with dual swords when someone like Hattori Hanzo, for instance, he can just get up and break my face for an attempt of executing him when he was laying on the ground. So that's my reward for actually knocking him down. Whereas weapon like a split staff, it has a 0.5 second animation speed of executing, and it does the same amount or even way more damage compared to fists, compared to dual swords or compared to X. So everything is viable. Yeah, sure. Like you can keep dreaming of it, but it's not the reality. In conclusion, what can I say about like the combat system? It, as the overall everything that we have done, it had definitely made some improvements. There's no denying that over the first game. It plays better than the first game. It's more. I'd say you can be more aggressive and defensive at the same time compared to the first game. You actually have more options, more choice that you can rely on safely.
Combat is faster as well.
Combat, yes, it's more faster and it's more fluid. However, when it comes to tuning in like certain abilities and balancing weapons against each other, as well as certain skills, individual skills, default weapon skills and boss skills by themselves, and the absence of proper hit advantage, the absence of proper indicator of when hyper armor is being activated, visual and audio cue, I mean, the strangeness of the hitboxes. Yeah, we totally forgot to speak about hitboxes. I mean, I've mentioned it when it comes to Spinning Dragon, but you had a plethora of other cases
I wouldn't want to mention hitboxes because my weapon is so shit when it comes to those hitbox issues. That was not a single issue with hitbox on Kusarigama has been fixed. Not a single one. Everything that was hurting basically my heart and my soul in Nioh 1 transferred without a single change to Nioh 2. And when I saw it immediately, like first to second stream, as I started to play this game, I noticed, wait a second, This isn't right. I've been complaining this when I was playing Nioh 1. Is it everything like everything repeats itself? History repeats itself? Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
like for every positive changes, there's like something negative about it, something either confusing or negative. Like we've mentioned, with skills, description doesn't match the actual application. With boss abilities being underwhelming and underperforming, and people trying to justify them by showing the fucking dojo mission. That's not negotiable. That's trash. Again, like the absence of hit advantage, which makes it almost impossible to, or I guess for masochists to play the builds that might utilize the slow weapons like swords, like Odachi and axe, and many other stuff. So it's a mixed bag. On the overall, I can say it was, if I'm going to evaluate combat, I'd say like it's the 60 to 40% ratio when it comes to 60% being more positive changes compared to first Nioh game and 40% negative stuff. So there are still plethora of room to improve, but improvement has to be done, and that's one of the topics that we are going to talk about in the future, in the right way. Not just throw different mechanics just for the sake of adding value by sheer numbers of them. No, balance out those mechanics, not just throw them, include them and balance them. Because if you were to just throw them without any kind of balancing, you will have the situation like we've mentioned with the easy target, or attracts enemies, and there's a third option, I forgot how exactly it's called, like three same freaking thing for taunting enemies. Who the hell uses parameter to taunt an enemy even if you're playing in co-op? Nobody is using them. Literally, this game, if you want to, and yes, we forgot to mention this, but that's already, this topic is going way too long. If you want to play as efficiently as possible, you're going to be focusing solely on damage. There's no such thing, even if you're playing a quote-unquote tank build, you're still gonna be you're still gonna be using as much damage sources as possible. Otherwise, you'll be trash. Period. There is no room for the taunt mechanic and tank class like in MMORPG. It's not an MMORPG, so I don't know.
Yeah,
why
not even mentioning the fact
parameters.
that pretty much all of the resistances to element types are just there for taking a slot, because it doesn't matter whether you have like 0 resistance or 50 resistance. Status effects apply if you're not using negators of status effect appliance such as Sake or some kind of a talisman. They will going to apply from one hit on higher difficulties. Sometimes such bosses like Atakimaru will going to apply 3 status effects at once just by touching you once. So it doesn't, like, there are many of stuff. This is going to be mostly like covered when it comes to like progression and stuff like this in that topic. But do keep in mind that in this game there is a ton of random bullshit that has no meaning, but it's there to be there because it adds like value. It adds this sense that you have a lot, but in reality you do have a lot of shit you have. That's what.
Yeah, that's factually it's a lot, but how well it's balanced, it's also factually one thing is blatantly works better than the other. The other thing is doesn't work at all. That's pretty much it.
Yep.
So in conclusion, what I can say this is again, combat moved towards the right direction, but and we have actually honored and expressed our gratitude towards those positive changes that we have enumerated at the beginning, but there are still questionable decisions that had to be either removed and or reworked, and I do not wish to see them in any way, shape or form in the future sequel and installment. Like, for example, boss skills are being trashed. That's, in my opinion, that should not be the boss skills. Like, again, skill that you could farm for doesn't amount of hours, and you're telling me that it does way less damage than skill that I unlocked at the freaking first difficulty. That's unacceptable in my point of view. Something like this should be removed, reworked entirely. Either or works for me. So that's that. Again, the ratio of positive moments for me is like 60 to 40. So that's my take on the combat system in general.
I'd say in conclusion that unlike the story, where you literally cannot find any redeeming qualities, combat has redeeming qualities. But
when it's working as intended.
Yes, but again, I've said this, and on my streams and on previous podcasts, that there will always going to be this trend of something goes good and then it goes into shit. And unfortunately, I can be like praising several elements that I liked about this game, and I will be like saying that, yeah, I like that one and this one is done good. But this doesn't going to change the fact that in the same category, some aspects will still going to be just as shitty, or just as lazy, with the lazy approach, just like it was with the story. Because like it is mind-boggling to me. It's like today, like I see this picture in the following shades. Like today we are doing our best. Next day we are doing twice as less. 2 days later we are not doing anything. 3 days later we are going to again try our best. Then 4 days later we are going to take 10 steps back when it comes to like where we progressed. We take 10 steps back. It's like you can create a song of how they created this game, of how stuff being, well, you went into the right direction, just go onwards with it. You had ideas, good ideas. No, again backwards, again strange stuff, again strange thing. And I am literally with their approach, and I have seen this, like many people are saying that with even Ninja Gaiden, like Ninja Gaiden 3, Ninja Gaiden 4 are kind of shit when it comes to
2 and 3.
Like when it comes to like first and second game. Will this the same going to be like the same for their future project? I don't see like, I don't want to predict, because current game development industry surprises in the wrong ways pretty much all the time. I want to see realizations and work upon improving good things, but I don't want to see those bad things in the vast amounts and quantities as they were present here. I just don't. Because then it will going to be extremely like hard to justify on whether or not should you even play the game. Like, well, yeah, there are good things, but then there is like this wall of bad things. You cannot really ignore them because you face them pretty much on a daily basis. So then how to evaluate this? I don't know. Like 50-50 is for me like good things and bad things. I see improvement, I see bad things. That's really sad for me. Like, I see that the combat became better than the first one, but at the same time, I see drawbacks that shouldn't be here.
Yeah, so this is it, ladies and gentlemen. This is our like final thoughts. I agree with my brother. I mean, in terms of the final score, we both shared our take on it. Just like we have mentioned, the adding, just the sheer adding of something new to the game doesn't mean that this is going to immediately signals that this whole like those new elements are going to work together. You not only have to add it, but you also have to test it. And unfortunately, testing it seems like that some of the elements testing hadn't been done. It just had been added for the sake of being there. But that's enough talk when it comes to combat system in Nioh 2. I would want to thank all of you who had watched us today. Whether you watch it from the beginning, middle, or the end, it doesn't really matter. Those of you who are going to be watching this on YouTube or have watched this on YouTube do know that the second episode already, no, that's already the third episode already available are going to be available on the Patreon 1 week earlier before we are going to be uploading this on YouTube, and you will have this opportunity to watch our content 1 week before the planned schedule. To check our Patreon page, there is a link in the separate tab below the Twitch player, so hop over it and see for yourselves what bonuses do we provide. For everything else, if you want to also stay up to date with everything related to the future content that we are going to be uploading, as well as news that we are sharing, plus watch exclusive content on your own, I would highly recommend you to follow us on the Twitter page or on the Facebook page that we have. Again, all the links are in the separate tab. And finally, if you want to support us in any way, shape, or form, you can do so by following a few simple steps. It will be to follow us on Twitch, subscribe to our YouTube channel, share the videos, leave a like to them. Also consider subscribing on Twitch, and likewise, like I've mentioned before, becoming a patron if you want to watch this content ahead of time. The next stream is going to be happening on probably the next week. I don't know about tomorrow, whether or not I'm going to be streaming something tomorrow. I haven't decided what future project I'm going to be focusing on. Maybe it's going to be a talkative stream on some of the subject, like we did with my brother today. Nevertheless, on the next week, my brother is going to return with his usual schedule. That will be Wednesday and Friday from 8 to 12 a.m. Eastern European Time UTC +2. And I am going to be either joining him or returning back to my own schedule on the weekends, on the Saturday and Sunday. Up until that point, you will always have something to watch on our YouTube channel, be it content related to Nioh 2, like highlights, walkthroughs, and other stuff that we have played. Grim Dawn, Doom Eternal, Doom 64, like various types of genre. We also have included guides, playthroughs, and reviews of those types of games. So there's always some content for you to watch before you're waiting for the new stream to occur. With that said, once again, thanks everyone for watching. Thanks for being here. I wish you all the best. Take care of yourselves. Stay sound, stay healthy and cheerful. And I, Alexander, also known as Andreas, will be seeing you all next time.
From my part, I would also want to say thanks to those who are watching today, thanks to those who are following us on our social medias, our YouTube channel, on our Twitch channel, who are joining our streams. Have a good time, have a good weekend, and we will going to be seeing with each other next time. Take care, guys, and see ya!